Bada bing, bada boom. All right, all right, all right. Tom O'Neill, how you doing?
Pretty good, Brock. How you doing?
Fantastic. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on the podcast.
Certainly, sure.
This whole experience of doing the podcast has been so amazing, getting to meet all different people from all facets of life. But when I read your book, right, and then I saw the Rogan podcast and then started going down the rabbit hole on Instagram, got to know a little bit more about you. It was a really great feeling that you wrote back, because there's a lot of people in life when they get a direct message or whatever it is, they don't even take the time to even message them.
Yeah, I don't think and I got a lot of crazy stuff in the email and DMs and stuff. I don't think I ignore and at least acknowledge it, because I remember what it was like when I was reaching out, trying to get people to talk to me for the book, and when they just ignored me, it was worse.
Absolutely. Do you mind doing me a favor? Just get a little bit closer. You can move this.
Yeah.
You can move this all the way over there.
Okay.
Are you good? There we go. Absolutely. I had a awesome girl on last night, Jackie Chu, and she's a world-renowned hairdresser, model, all this really great stuff. And she says that every single message that she gets, she takes her time to write them back, because what you exactly said, everyone's going through shit. Everyone's struggling. Everyone's trying to make things happen. So just that little bit changes everything.
It's easy too. I don't write long responses unless they're warranted.
Yeah.
But at least I try to respond somehow to whatever is asked of me.
Yeah.
Or, a lot of it is people who think they have leads and tips and stuff like that.
I'm sure you get a lot of that.
Yeah, especially since that other podcast.
Yeah. Everyone thinks that they're an investigative journalist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And actually, luckily, there are some that are solid. And there have been a lot of interesting kind of contacts I've gotten since the book came out. And I'm following up some of it. It's probably like 10% of everything that comes into me, about 10% is useful.
Yeah. Well, that's sifting through a lot of shit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you see yourself doing like something like a follow-up or?
Possibly. My collaborator was actually in town, last week or the week before. And we've been talking about it ever since the book's come out. And I'm a little bit more apprehensive than he is, because having spent 20 years of my life, I don't know if I want to go back into the same, hole. But there's a lot of stuff that didn't end up in the book for various reasons.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get it out there in some form. And he wants to too. I won't do it alone, because I'm not going to.
I don't doubt it.
And with him, he's really on my ass, and he understands. I call him the Tom Whisperer. He knows how I think and communicate. I'm sorry, all of a sudden I got it.
No, it's all good. Wash it down with some good old beer.
Yeah, that might help. He's just really good at pulling the important stuff out and letting me know what isn't.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
He worked with Prince before me.
Oh shit.
Yeah, he was writing Prince's memoir when Prince died.
Damn.
And because of Prince's death, that's how I got him. I inherited him through the agency I work for, because they said, look, after Prince died, the family went crazy, and there were all these battles over the estate. He didn't have a will. And so Dan had to stop working on the Prince book. And he also had a huge challenge, because he'd only worked with Prince about 3 months. He didn't have a lot of material.
Damn.
And he knew he'd have probably a year off before he resumed. And it was whatever amount of time it was. I think it was like 16 months or so that we worked together. It was a perfect amount of time just to churn it out finally.
Damn, so he was able to take 20 years worth of investigative journalism and within 16 months create the masterpiece that you have put out.
I don't know about masterpiece.
No, man, come on. Yeah, I mean, you got to give yourself a little bit of credit, It's when anyone puts 20 years worth of effort into one thing.
That wasn't a choice.
Well, how is that not a choice, right? You decide.
I kept not ending because I needed more constantly.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest decision, was finally like, and my agent was telling me from 5 years to 6 years, and you've got enough. And I kept saying, no, I know there's more out there. And it was true. I mean, I probably kept getting important stuff for at least 15 years.
Jeez.
And then the last couple of years, it was mostly just putting it together. And before Dan came, I was organizing and writing chapters and stuff like that. But he really came in and just put a magic
and just
wand
put it all
over
together.
Yeah.
What do you think that is inside of you that could not let go and wanted to continue to push? Because there are many different type of people in this world, but it takes a certain type of individual that is so hyper focused on one thing and not to give up.
About me?
Yeah. What is that?
I didn't have a wife or kids or family, and if you don't have a life,
Yeah.
you can do that, which is dangerous. If I had a partner, it might not have, I'm sure it wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But I could isolate, and I don't know how healthy that was. I mean, there were times I didn't see people for weeks, when I was working. I mean, friends.
I get that.
There were holidays I missed with my family, weddings I didn't go to because I kept thinking it's just around the corner what I needed to get. And if I leave or stop this. So, yeah, there was definitely an obsessive quality to it, which I think I have. But it was also, I knew there was information out there, and I knew I could get it if I was really focused and persistent.
Yeah.
And that's how I did get a lot of my interviews, because half of the people who talked to me wouldn't talk to me for a long, long time. And then, of course, when they did, then they regretted talking to me.
Well, yeah, I definitely understand that.
Yeah.
But that's amazing, man. I mean, to be able to do something like that and not give up, so I really commend you on doing that. If you look back at your life, right, has there been anything else that you've been so hyper focused on, laser focused on?
I mean, the story I did before this,
Yeah.
I talk about it a little bit in the book, maybe just a couple paragraphs. It was an unsolved murder of a woman. You're talking about my life, though.
Yeah, your life in general, yeah.
In my life in general, I don't think so. I was actually kind of all over the place prior to this, and I never had a plan to be a journalist either. That just happened 10 or 15 years before I got involved with this. But I don't know if I had an obsessive nature about other stuff before this.
Real quick, because I do want to dive deep into your story and who Tom O'Neill is. Just for people listening right now, do you mind sharing a little bit about just chaos and the book that you wrote?
Well, basically, I mean, you also said, why did how did I keep going, and why did I keep going? And it took 20 years. Well, if you read the book, well, you have it.
Yes.
People read the book.
100%.
Or if you go to Amazon and read the reviews, the criticism the book gets more than anything else, and luckily it's prevalent, but most people seem to like it more than not. But the people who don't like it because they finish it and they feel they haven't gotten the answers they were hoping to get that might have been teased, in the title of the book.
Yes.
And that was why I kept going, because I didn't want to have that kind of a book. It wasn't really until something like, I remember seeing Making a Murderer, the first season of that. And what fascinated me about that was the end of the season, the people who made the film, I think it was 2 women, you never know whether or not they think those guys are guilty or innocent. They just present everything. And when they did interviews and people asked them what they thought, they said, we don't want to, lead our viewers. And since it is kind of a great unknown still, I mean, unless somebody confesses to the murder, even though these guys have been convicted, it's not. So when I saw that they could do something like that without a conclusion, I thought, well, I could too, and we did it. And luckily, I think more people than not love the fact that they have to decide at the end of the book what they think happened.
I love that.
And just follow the trail that the breadcrumb trail I put out there.
And you put out the facts. To kind of bring it back though, real quick, we shared kind of the Cliff Notes version of
the book.
Yeah, of the book.
Yeah, it's basically a look at the famous Tate LaBianca murders, and it's through my first-person account of investigating. And I began as a magazine story in '99. It was supposed to commemorate what was then going to be the 30th anniversary of the murders for Premiere Magazine, which doesn't, like a lot of stuff, doesn't exist anymore. But for 2 years, they paid me just to report that, because I got the editor-in-chief also sucked into kind of my conspiracy world, because I started finding out stuff about the official narrative about the case that didn't add up. And in a nutshell, everything kind of broke out in the first month or so of reporting, mostly because I was having these interviews with Vince Bugliosi, who prosecuted the case and then wrote to this day, the best-selling true crime book of all time about it. And I started finding out that he had been. First, I thought it might have been just a little incompetence. He did a great job prosecuting, and then I thought, oh no, this had to be deliberate. So I found holes in his narrative and holes in stuff he said that he had found. I couldn't find evidence that he actually had found stuff up. And then I started discovering that he had actually kind of colluded with certain witnesses, written their testimony script, and they lied on the stand. So that turned it into a whole different animal and became less a magazine story, evolved into a book.
Yeah.
And then it kind of bled into other areas of kind of famous events that happened a little before and a little after the Tate LaBianca murders in '69, and also government programs that were always hidden and were never supposed to have been discovered. I found out that they kind of had influence in some of the events I was writing about.
Yes.
So it became this unwieldy monster that hopefully people, if they read the whole book, they'll be satisfied.
Or want more, like especially, the phenomenon, I hate saying this, of Charles Manson. It's, what you wrote in the book that you put out changes the script on everything and really makes you think outside the box. And I'm glad of that. It's really great to hear from people that they're reconsidering things that they thought they just took for granted for forever. Absolutely.
And I get that from so many people who've read the book. And even yesterday, I got an email from a guy who was in the sheriff's department in the 60s who had encounters with Manson. Then he was in the DA's office as an investigator. They always have investigators to prep for all their trials.
Yeah.
And he loved the book, and he's been telling all the other sheriffs that are still alive. And I said, well, I interviewed most of those guys, but most of them are dead. He's actually their peer. He must be older. I haven't asked him how old. But the fact that he loves it and he didn't take it at all as something that was contrived or crazy makes me feel great.
You should. You should. There's so much bullshit out there. If you look at like MK Ultra and everything that happened during that time period, it's just a really dark part in American history, and the ability for them to do things like that. You crack that wide open in chaos and make you kind of go, well, this could be a possibility, but you leave it where it's like, you could have said, I know for sure that, Charles Manson and all of this. And no, you don't. You're, it's what I like to call no bullshit, Right. Even before we started the podcast, people ask you all the time, like, what do you think? Right. And your answer is, I don't know.
I still don't know.
Exactly. You still don't know. And there's chances are you probably might never know.
Yeah.
Hopefully you do. For the amount of work you put into it, out of anyone in this entire world, I hope that you find out. But, I want to start back at, who you are as a person, right? Where did, when we talked about this, you said you grew up in Philly, right?
Yeah. Well, a suburb of Philly.
Philly. Now, growing up in Philly, did you siblings, mom, dad? What was it like growing up in Philly? Paint a little picture real quick.
Yeah, it was pretty standard. I came from both of my parents. Well, my mom's parents were immigrants from Italy.
Okay.
So there was that big Italian influence. And then my father was second generation Irish. And there were 4 kids. I was the youngest kid until my little sister came along. And I think that then I became the middle kid who kind of caused all the problems. So my 2 older brothers excelled at everything, sports, academics, behavior, never got in trouble. And I was the complete opposite. Didn't do great in sports, didn't do great in academics, and just was wild. My parents always had to go into school because I was getting into trouble. And in a way, I think it kind of entertained them because the other 2 were really great, but kind of boring.
Keeping them on their toes.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. And then, I was always curious,
Yeah.
So I don't know if that doesn't answer the obsessive question, but, I did crazy stuff as a kid. I would, so we grew up right behind Villanova University, which is a big university. And that was the coolest thing in the world because that was my playground from the time I was 5 or 6 years old.
Damn.
We would just break into or sneak into the football games, the basketball games, concerts. We would go to parties when we were 13.
Yeah.
That's where we started drinking, watching stuff, in the dorms and things.
Yes.
And I was a shoe shine boy when I was about 10 or 11 there for a couple of years.
Okay.
And this is a story my mom tells. At one point, they got called, she and my dad, into my elementary school. It was like 4th or 5th grade, because I had invited Hare Krishnas that I'd met at the campus to my school to talk to the class without telling the teacher, because I knew that she wouldn't approve. I said, just show up, tell them Miss Capinetti has asked you to come in, and then I'll take it from there. But they didn't get past the office, because I knew my teacher, Miss Capinetti, wouldn't have had them in. And they were really upset about it, because there were like 2 or 3 Krishnas who thought they were going to talk to 5th graders. So I did stuff like that.
Why did you do that?
I wanted to know more about them. I was trying to think about that the other day, because I was telling that to a friend. It might have been just to upset everything at the school.
Okay.
But I think I also, I was talking to them on the campus, and I brought a homeless guy home when I was a teenager and snuck him into the house and thought I was gonna. My mom woke up when I was getting him in and freaked out because my 14-year-old sister was in bed. I did that stuff all the time. Yeah.
You definitely were the black sheep of the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now that's so funny. Now, growing up in Philadelphia, did you go to school out there, college?
No, well, I went to high school,
Okay.
and then after high school, I wanted to get out of town, because I traveled a little bit, not a lot, but most of the kids I went to high school with went to schools in the tri-state area, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Jersey, whatever. And I wanted to go further. So I went to a school in St. Paul, Minnesota called McAllister College, a small liberal arts school. Actually, I really liked it. I was there for 2 years, but I had been making Super 8 movies in high school and junior high just as a hobby. I never took a class. I didn't want to be part of the AV club because they weren't cool. And but at college, you're supposed to declare your major by junior year.
Yeah.
And I was studying English and history because that's what I was most interested in and best at. But I didn't want to be a teacher, So I thought, maybe I should go to film school instead, because I liked that. And I had actually, instead of, McAllister was kind of a hippy-dippy school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it still is, but back then it was. And I talked to several professors into letting me make movies instead of turning in term papers and stuff.
Yes.
And they're pretty good. So I ended up applying to a bunch of film schools and went to NYU.
Damn.
So I transferred to NYU Film School, and I was there 1 year, and then I dropped out because there was a feature film being made in my hometown called Taps, which was about a bunch of cadets that take over a military school. It was Sean Penn's first movie.
All right.
Tom Cruise's first movie. I mean, they'd done a little things. And then Tim Hutton had just won an Oscar for Ordinary People, and George C. Scott was in it. So I wanted to work on that movie, and I thought, why go to school when I could just get into the business that way? And, I got a job and ended up doing production work for a year or two, and then realizing I ultimately wanted to write scripts.
Shit.
So I, when you're working in production, especially, I don't know how it is now, probably is the same way, but you're working 12-hour minimum.
Oh my gosh,
days.
yes.
And I could never write, and I actually liked it, and I moved pretty fast from like being a PA to being an assistant location manager to a location manager.
Shit.
On pretty big features for 2 or 3 years.
And
then I thought, well, this is crazy. I'll never write, and I'll get sucked into this world, probably make good money and enjoy it, but it's not going to feed my creative part.
I love that.
So I quit the business and went back to NYU and finished.
Holy shit. And how old were you at this time?
It was about 2.5 years after I'd left. So probably, instead of graduating in 81 when I would have, I think I graduated in about 83 or 84. And stayed in New York and started driving a horse and carriage. And did that off and on for 8 years.
Just while you were writing and
I needed a way to make money while I wrote.
Okay.
And at that point, I'd actually kind of transitioned to writing plays. And I got more interested in theater, having seen it for the first time really in my life when I lived in New York than film. And I wrote a couple one acts that got a little bit of attention, not full productions, but won awards in these contests, but nothing ever really amounted to anything. And then one day on a lark, I had written up a story about an encounter I had. And while I was driving the carriage, but it was when I got home that night, I sent it to New York Magazine and they published it.
Jeez.
And all of a sudden I started getting, I just started submitting stuff and getting published everywhere. I thought, oh, this is easy enough. Then I became a journalist, accidentally.
Organically.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. It's,
I mean, it kind of shows. I mean, I often wonder if I'd gone to journalism school or worked on a school paper, my book wouldn't have taken 20 years. It might have taken 2 or something. Because all the stories I ended up doing when I was a feature writer were always way too long and late. But my editor, who I worked with almost the same woman through 10 years, 12 years. She's the same one who assigned the Manson story to me that became the monster it did, and I always blame her for it. But she would run them long, and she'd always say, do not give me more than, 3,500 words. And this is when you could run long features in magazines.
Yeah.
She said, don't give me 5,000. I'd give her 6,000. And then she'd end up running like almost 5,000. I say, see? And I think I was pretty good in the beginning. Then I kind of got burnt out on, I started doing celebrity journalism. And, there's just so many Harrison Ford interviews you can do without losing your mind. And I created something for the magazine, an investigative series about the entertainment industry. So I started writing investigative pieces about show business. And I think the first one I did was about the behind the scenes going on in daytime talk shows.
Okay.
Most of those shows don't even exist anymore, but it was about what the producers did to wrangle guests and the fights that went on between the shows. And
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, my lead for that story, I still one of my favorites. The lead is, how you open it.
Uh-huh.
It was a woman, I can't remember what her name was, but she was in a trailer park somewhere in the Midwest, and she had just slit her breasts open with a razor to remove her implants because she thought they were leaking. And she almost died. And there was a little paragraph about it in the local papers. And those producers that read that stuff thought we want her on as a guest. So 2 shows went out to try to get her and to come back to New York. One of them did. And the other one, while they had her in a hotel and she was supposed to go on the next day, the other show kidnapped the woman from the hotel, brought her to their show, and she was still disoriented because she was on all kinds of pain medication because they had to stitch up her breast. That was the lead to the story, and then things got crazy in that story. Yeah. Wait. I think it's on my website if people want to read it. It's called, I can't remember what the title was. It's called like The Talk Show Wars or something.
I don't even know what to say about that. That is
Yeah. So those are the stories that I ended up doing. Then I won an award because I did a story about sexism at Saturday Night Live, and I got all these women, present cast members in the 90s, and then former ones, from Jane Curtin and Julie Louis-Dreyfus.
Yeah.
To tell me how horrible it was there for women. And, Saturday Night Live and NBC wasn't happy with the story, but it was a good story. So that's kind of how I became an investigative reporter.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, everything that you've said has happened organically.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever topic it is, you continue you push and drive it forward. As I think he's pulling this up, but I want to talk about Saturday Night Live real quick. What was that experience like, having to go talk to all these people and find out the sexism and all that bullshit?
Well, what happened first was they had asked me, the magazine had a series called On the Set. So they would send me to a set for a week of a popular show or a movie, and I would spend a week with the creative people and then the actors and just interview them all and then put together a story. So actually, I was thinking of that when I came here. The last time I was in Santa Clarita was in the 90s, I think. There was a show called Melrose Place.
Yeah.
So I went and spent a week with them, and they shot it in the studio around here. And I remember how much I hated the commute. And I didn't live in LA then. They put me up in a hotel. I lived in New York, and they flew me out. And it was a long commute when you're coming at rush hour.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. But with Saturday, so then, they're pretty banal stories. You just try to make them interesting. And luckily, I would do shows right when they were beginning, usually. But actually, Saturday Night Live wasn't that case because they'd already been around for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So they asked me to the magazine wanted me to do on the set story with them. So I spent a week with them. And it was the first year that Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, Chris Farley, and Rob Schneider were on the show. Jesus. And they were and David Spade, and they were up and coming. And I hung out with those guys, and my story mostly focused on them because they were all trying to break out.
Yeah.
And it was a good story, you know, nothing scandalous or
Yeah.
sensational. It was just how they put the show together, what everyone's like, and who the new cast members are. And then a year or two later, a friend of mine who's a stand-up comic who's friends with lots of comedians and stuff. He's actually the guy that got me on the Rogan episode, Greg Fitzsimmons.
Yeah.
He was friends with Sarah Silverman.
Uh-huh.
So Sarah Silverman, a lot of people probably don't even know, she was a cast member, a featured cast member on Saturday Night Live, and she was fired by Lorne Michaels. And Greg told me, he was my neighbor then in New York, he's like, you know, all the women I know who've been at that show have had horrible experiences. You know, they treat the guys like gods and treat the women like shit. He goes, let me see if Sarah will talk to you. So I went and met her that day, the same morning she was fired, by fax, I think.
Uh-huh.
And we had coffee, and she was crushed because she'd been a stand-up, but nobody knew who she was. People who watched Saturday Night Live would see her. She'd get a minute or two every show, but beyond the clubs in New York, she wasn't famous yet. And I mean, she goes, I have to go to the laundromat and get my laundry and then take it up to my apartment on the 4th floor that I share. And she thought, I thought the show was going to change all that. And I don't know why they fired me. I thought I was doing well. She got pissed at me when the story came out because I said she got sniffly. And she was already cultivating her image as like this tough woman who's not emotional.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. But that was, so for that, once I got the story from Sarah, then I started getting access to other women.
Yeah.
And then I did a whole, you know, Lorne Michaels couldn't figure it out because I'd been a friend of the show for the first story. And then when I went back with this story and sat with him, it was a tough interview. It was kind of like my Bugliosi encounters.
Yeah.
But that story came out, got a lot of attention. And then Sarah was pissed. She told Fitz that she didn't cry. She didn't get emotional. She was just kind of resigned. I go, come on. I have the tape. I have the audio tape. I said I'd be happy to play it to her.
Yeah.
But she gets choked up.
Oh, my gosh. Yes, sir.
I don't have the first article, but I did pull up Saturday Night Fever.
Oh.
Is that the one you're referring to, Tom?
That's the one that I did on the set. That was the friendly
The
story.
first one.
That was what opened up the door. It says Saturday Night Fever. Oh, hey, bring that back. Behind the scenes of Saturday Night Live, new cast members struggle to make a name for themselves. Old ones fight, not to be forgotten, and everyone lives with the ghosts of glories past by Tom O'Neill.
Yeah, and the guy that story focused on mostly was David Spade, because David Spade was trying to, they all want to introduce a recurring character, because if you get a recurring character, then you're on quite a bit. So he had a character called the Receptionist. And it was kind of growing, and everybody liked it. And every show, they're like, it's not ready yet. So they thought it was ready for that show. And he was so excited, and I just followed him that whole week. And then, you know, they do the dress rehearsal, and then they cut stuff. They always shoot a little more, and then they cut what they don't think works well, and they cut his sketch, and it devastated him. It ended up going on like a week or two later, and it became a recurring character.
Yeah.
But, and then Chris Rock... the magazine sent me back to do a profile just of him because he was starting to break out. And I was the first person ever to do a national story on him. He'd only had local coverage then because it was still he was so new in his career. So I got to know a bunch of those guys, and they were all great. I mean, Chris Farley did cry when I interviewed him, and I think it's in the story. He was talking about his first week there. They made him do a strip off with Patrick Swayze, who was the host. And if you remember, Chris Farley, and he said, you know, my biggest insecurity is that people only think I'm funny because I'm a fat guy. And he said, so my very first week there, they made fun of my body. And he said, I almost didn't do it, but I knew I had to do it. And I mean, the poor guy was really, he was a fascinating character. He was so sensitive.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, he just did anything he could to make people laugh and like him. And he, you know, obviously had a bad end. But I got to know all those guys for the week, and it was cool. But yeah, that was a whole lifetime ago for me.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question for you, Tom. You graduated from NYU in 84, 85?
I'm trying, no, not 85. I think it was between 82 and 84.
82 and 84?
Yeah.
Adam Sandler graduated in 89. Did you guys ever meet?
No, he was there too far after me. Yeah. The ones who were there when I was there was Spike Lee and who else? Oh, a guy who sat next to me in my class. My first film class there was, his name is Chris Columbus.
Okay.
And he did all those John Hughes movies.
Oh.
He became huge. And here's a mistake. If you want to talk about, reasons, things not to repeat, if you have another chance. I liked him a whole lot, and he was a nerd. And I had just moved to New York for my first time ever, and it was like the height. It was 79, I think. So punk rock's kind of exploding.
Yeah.
And he and I were like becoming friends, and I'm like, but I don't really want to be his friend. I want to be with the cool kids in the class. So there were a bunch of punks in the class, like this guy Bill, who wore fingernail polish and his hair was purple and blue. And this is 79, before guys did that.
Yeah.
And all that. He looked like Lou Reed. So I
Shit.
hung out with all the people who were kind of affected and artsy. None of them ever became successful in the art world or film or entertainment world. Chris Columbus, who I kind of spurned, and he probably wouldn't even remember me now.
Yeah.
He became huge.
That's crazy.
Yeah, because he was in the front row with the other nerds.
Yep.
And there were a couple other people in our class who were in the front row who were all nerds, and they all now are really successful.
And that's a running story, though. If you look at like Steve Jobs or, freaking, Jesus, why am I drawing a blank on his name?
Bill Gates?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I was like, Bill, and I talk about him all the freaking time. Brain fart. You probably look back at like all those individual stories, right?
I don't even know where the artsy kids are anymore. I lost.
No. I mean, it's kind of now. It's a different time. It's like cool to be a nerd,
I know.
to be able to geek out on things. But for you, when you look back at those experiences like Saturday Night Live, right?
Mm-hmm.
That week. And getting to speak with Chris Farley and find out like who he truly is as a person, getting to do Chris Rock's, very first, interview, right?
Yeah.
What does that feel like? Do you appreciate that? And does that?
Well, I was drawn to them because they were. I guess I was a little bit older than them, not much, but I was more interested in that. I mean, the magazine was good. They said just go to the set and find the story. And I was much more interested in the new guys there.
Yeah.
And I could also see that there was a definite click thing happening with those guys. And I mean, you probably weren't even alive when this was going on.
86 was born.
Yeah. I mean, they were like the Rat Pack for young comedians after their first season there. And they all became, except for Schneider, who's a little well known, they all became pretty big.
Yeah.
But that was the nucleus of it. And I was really just fascinated by watching them kind of find their footing. And I wasn't as interested in the people who were there for a long time. I mean, I interviewed Phil Hartman, who later had a horrible death. Not Lauren. What's his name? Al Franken. He was a writer on the show and
became a senator.
But those guys have been interviewed millions of times,
Yeah.
and they knew it was hard to get interesting stuff from them. They were all honest and straightforward, but it was the young guys who were, they weren't used to the attention.
Yes.
So they're always the better story.
They were more open and real.
Yeah.
I think about that moment you were talking about Chris Farley is like you look at his unfortunate life, passing away too soon. Him, having to take off his clothes. I remember that. I mean,
that became a famous
huge,
kind of iconic
freaking
sketch.
iconic SNL sketch, right? But internally, that hurt him,
Oh, it
right?
hurt, it really was.
But he continued to do it over and over and over and over again. And
yeah.
I mean, we wonder why he, there's so many other reasons why he passed away, but it definitely at the root of it is the depression, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I'm just remembering I also ended up doing a cover story a couple years later on Patrick Swayze, just not connected to Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
He had a movie coming out, and that was one of my hardest interviews. One of the nicest guys in the world, but I had flown on a red eye because I was still living in New York out to L.A. I went to the set of the movie that he was working on, and it was his last day on the film. I can't remember what it was called now, but they shot that scene. I passed it on the way here at the Veterans Cemetery, kind of near Sunset and Sepulveda or whatever, or I can't remember. Sunset and the Four. But I go by there and I had a flashback to that so I spent the day with him on his last day on the movie, and then we went to his trailer to talk for the interview the first day, and he talked from I think 6 or 7 until about midnight. And it's great because you want people to really talk, and back then you had that kind of access. But I fell asleep because I was. Wait. I had jet lag, and I flew and landed at like 10 in the morning, went straight to the set, and I'm on New York time, and I'll never forget. I just heard this Tom, and I wake up and I'm like, shit, I am, and how do you apologize? And he was like the big guy. This
He
is
was so
the
big.
90s.
Yeah.
And he was, the thing is, and he was really into mystical, he had a magic wand that he wanted me to hold to get the energy from it. And he was into all this stuff that I just wasn't interested in. And when he was telling me these stories about his dog had died like that day or the day before, and he was definitely heartbroken by it. And he cried during the interview, which you always want.
Yeah.
But then he started talking about the reincarnated pets he'd had in the past. And I think that's when I dozed off. But he was cool. He didn't get upset with it. And
Did the interview continue?
we finished it. And I actually, the next morning, I went to see a friend who lived, in LA, and he called my hotel and left a message. And I didn't get it until I got back, because back then, at least I was at the Mondrian. I don't think they had recorded messages or whatever it was. No, it was a recorded message, because he goes, I can't stop thinking about our conversation last night, and I want to spend more time with you. Do you want to go up in a plane with me? Because he flew planes.
Holy shit.
And I was like, wow, that would have been great, go up in a plane with him. But I didn't get it until too late. And I called him, and we'd actually finished. I think we got everything that first night. And he didn't return my calls. And then on Monday or Tuesday, my editor, Leslie, called from New York, and she said, so Patrick's publicist thinks that either you drugged him or hypnotized him, because he said he keeps talking about you and you did something to him. And
What?
She said, I said, never ask them to do something social with you, because you are supposed to have some distance.
Yes.
And she goes, I couldn't believe he invited him to go flying with him when the interview was over and stuff, because he hadn't even written this. I hadn't written the story yet. And Leslie said, you didn't put any. I go, no, I fell asleep. I was the one who felt drugged. So I never. And a lot of people get upset with your stories. He was upset with my story. I never heard from him, but his publicist called the magazine, and he took offense to something I said about his wife Lisa, who was a dancer.
Okay.
I just made it seem like she was only a dancer. I think she was trying to be an actress too, and her career never took off. So I don't think he was upset that I didn't identify her as an actor of caliber and all that. So it's weird how you never know what's going to piss people off. But otherwise, I think he was okay.
You fell asleep.
Yeah. I think it's the only time it happened.
Shit happens, man. Unfortunately, his story,
Also ended.
Too soon. Ended way too soon. So when you're doing all of this, how old were you How old were you at that time?
If it was the 90s, I think 30s, like early to mid 30s.
So
because I got the assignment to do the Manson thing, and at that point, then I never did another story for 20 years, except for this one. I had just turned 40.
Holy shit. So before leading up to the Manson thing, you were still in New York, though.
Well, no, I was in New York and working there and loving New York,
Yeah.
but I kept coming out here. The magazine would send me out here 3 or 4 times. And again, this was the days that, magazines were flush with cash. So they'd send me out, put me up in the Sunset Marquis, the Chateau Marmont, the Mondrian. I'd get a rental car, and I'd be on an expense account for like a week or more. And it was great. And a lot of my friends from New York also were writers, actors, comedians and stuff. They had all kind of migrated out here. So I'd see them, and they kept trying to get me to move to LA. And I didn't want to live in LA. But finally I said, you know what? Maybe I'll just try it for a year or two, and I'll sublet my place in New York so I can go back after 2 years. And friends of mine actually found me an apartment and put a deposit on it, and then told me about it. And they said, so you have to come. So I talked to the magazine, and they said, I said, you'll save a lot of money because I'll already be out there. And they said, great, if you want to do it. So I did it. And literally about 6 months before the 2 years was up on my sublet in New York, I got the magazine assignment. And then it started going beyond the deadlines, and I knew it was a big story. So at the 2-year mark, my landlord put an eviction notice on. I had a guy in there that was a legal sublet. It was a great apartment in Little Italy that I loved. And they said, if you're not back here by, the exact 2-year date, he's got to go, and you're losing the apartment.
Holy shit.
So I had to choose between, and back then, and even now, an apartment in New York was rent control, was a great price.
Fuck yeah.
But that was the first kind of real tough decision, I guess, associated with this, was what was more important for me, to go back to that apartment or get this story. So I stayed, lost the apartment, and then ended up, working on the same thing in LA until last year.
Jeez, man.
So I never got back I go back a lot to visit, but I'm still thinking, I always have a fantasy of moving back there. I might.
Do you have friends and family out there?
Well, I have family in New York, Maryland, and Philly. My mom's 93. She's still alive in Philly.
Wow.
So I
Shout
go
out
back
to mom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
She listened to every one of these things.
Yeah.
I try to keep them a little clean, but she was shocked. She had never heard of Rogan.
Yeah.
So she wanted to do her research before I was on. I said, don't listen to any of his shows. and she's like, she called me, I don't want you going on his show, Tommy. I go, Mom, he's like the Oprah now for books.
Yes.
I go, my friend Fitz, who got me on, said that he and his comedian friends, if they had the choice between being on Fallon, Colbert, Kimmel, or Rogan, they'd all do Rogan because he has a much bigger base.
Yeah, huge.
So she's like, well, if you think so. So I did it. And it was relatively clean, I think.
Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
she's like, now she loves him. Because not only that, he talks about the book.
Yeah.
Like every third or fourth guest he has, if they get into anything at all, conspiracy, drug related, hippie, he starts telling them how great the book is. And then my sales skyrocket. So my mom's like, he's such a nice boy. She loves him.
He's such a good boy. That's so awesome. And I want to get to that experience. Because I think that it's important, but I do want to bring it back to kind of the beginning because we're kind of leading up to everything, right? So at that moment, right, you had to sublet your apartment. What was it? Was it the book? Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, because was it even a book at that point?
No, it was still a magazine article.
It was still a magazine article,
but
right?
I knew that I couldn't go back to New York. I mean, what I should have done in hindsight, but I was still kind of broke, I should have just gone back and spent a month there and then come back to LA. And, my landlord was, you guys are too young, but his name's John Zaccaro, and his wife was Geraldine Ferraro, who was the first woman to run for vice president.
Yes.
So that was a big deal, and he was not a nice landlord. And I knew that he had eyes everywhere, so I knew I couldn't get away with doing it illegally. That's why I did it legally the first time. Because I didn't want to be evicted before the two. If I did an illegal sublet, he would have known, and I would have lost it the first month I left. So I could have tried coming back, but it would have been a problem. And it was just like I knew that what I was doing was really important. I might not have another chance, and I couldn't live in New York because the people I had to interview, the archives, the police record, everything I had to get was here.
Yeah.
So I let it go.
Yeah.
And now I can't even walk down that street anymore because I just get so sad. I mean, the neighborhood has also changed. Little Italy was the best neighborhood when I moved there in the 80s. I was there about 17 years. And now it's, I don't know what it's like with COVID, but prior to COVID, it completely turned into like a real kind of, all the little shops were replaced by boutiques.
Yeah.
Like they'll sell one designer handbag in this glass window that costs $10,000, and all the Dominicans, the Chinese, the Italians, they've all left the neighborhood, and it's all Wall Street people or tech people, young people. There's no diversity anymore. When I was there, it was struggling losers and artists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But maybe that'll happen again with COVID. I don't know.
I don't mean to laugh because it is sad, but I mean, I know with COVID, a lot of people have.
Well, my collaborator lives in Brooklyn, and he keeps telling me all his friends are leaving. I said, Dan, every time one of them leaves, find out where their apartment is and what they're paying, and if I can afford it, maybe I'll do the bi-coastal thing for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I hear rent prices have dropped tremendously.
Yeah, there was an article in the Times yesterday. For the first time, the median rent is $3,000. Which when I lived there, when I left, I was paying $925 for this massive apartment on Mulberry between Prince and Spring, one of the coolest blocks in the city.
$925.
Yeah, that was 97.
That's crazy. What was the median average before COVID?
Well, it was rent control, but I think you still. Well, actually, that's right. When Little Italy was changing and becoming Nolita, I think you could still get a studio then for about 8 or 9. Mine was considered a 1-bedroom.
Okay.
But a 1-bedroom would have been about 11 or 12. And I'm sure the place I have now is probably 3,000, 3,500 or something.
What was it now, like in 2020, before COVID? Like before it was like because you said $3,000 now. What do you think it was before?
Oh no, when I'm saying my apartment then?
Yeah, like the median average in January 2020.
Yeah, I would guess if it's 3,000 now, it was probably about 1,000.
1,000 more?
No, 1,000 flat. I actually need to read the article. I just read the headline.
Yeah.
But I don't know how they define an apartment. I mean, is that a studio or one
That's
bedroom
true, right?
or 2 bedroom?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, find out what the median income. Oh, there we go. Here we go. All right. What does it say? It says average rent in Brooklyn and rent prices. So Brooklyn, New York market trends highlights the average rent for apartment in Brooklyn is $2,951, 5% increase compared to the previous year. So damn it, there's still an increase compared to the previous year, even with COVID. But how long does that last?
Yeah.
I mean, and we don't need to go down this whole COVID conversation right now, but I do want to bring it back to kind of your story. So you moved out here a year or two later. That is when you got the contract to start working on the story.
Yeah, and that was a 3-month assignment. You know, it was supposed to be done in 3 months.
Yeah.
Turn it around and then get the next one. But like I said, I got the editor-in-chief kind of sucked into what I was finding, and he was in New York, but he'd come out to LA and come to my apartment, and we'd spread all my files on the floor, and he got really excited about it. And
Holy shit.
so he actually paid me monthly for almost 2 years. I think it was 16, 18 months, and then got fired. And
No way.
Yeah. And when I found out he got fired, my editor, so he's the editor-in-chief. He runs the whole magazine, but he was personally invested in my story. But my editor, Leslie, who assigned it, she called me to tell me, I said, please tell me it didn't have anything to do with my story, because it was a huge financial suck. The magazine lost a lot of money that I had to, I'm not allowed to talk about it because I never published the story there. When he got fired, the new guy came and he wanted the story in a month or two. And I said, I can't turn it in. I haven't answered questions. Then I got my book agent, who was pretty high and mighty and powerful. And now he's one of the partners that owns ICM. He's the one that got me out of my magazine obligation by reaching a settlement with those guys about what we were going to do with the other money. And then he was the one who kind of shepherded it through the book process, and he's still my agent.
What do you think it was at that time? Because I mean, you had not even come close to having anything that you have now. I mean, what was it? What do you think it was?
Once it went beyond just the Manson murders into COINTELPRO, MK Ultra, and especially it was right around that time that I had found these documents implicating Jolly West in his files at UCLA.
Yeah.
And that was big because he was a very prominent, now dead, or even then deceased psychiatrist who had a worldwide reputation, and he had been accused in 1977 when the world found out that MK Ultra existed thanks to a whistleblower. He'd been accused of participating in these like Nazi-like experiments on people without their awareness or consent. And he denied it, and he went to his grave never being held accountable. And every so often it would come up, and every time he was, accused of it, he would laugh and say he would threaten. He would either get angry and threaten to sue it if they published it, or he would just laugh it off. And he made the mistake of leaving these papers in his archive at UCLA that I found, like a needle in a haystack. And once I found that, and then I knew about his involvement at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic where Manson was going, and his involvement with Jolly West. The day that West had his nervous breakdown was the day that he visited him, and that was what he was doing for the CIA secretly, was learning how to develop those techniques. So then I knew it was like a much bigger story than a magazine could have handled anyway.
Jesus, how long you started it, and then how long up until that point did you figure out just that chunk right there?
I think the West stuff happened about the summer of, I started in March of 1999. I think it was the summer of, I should remember all this, but I try. It's either the summer of 2000 or the summer of 2001 that I spent the entire summer at the Charles Young Library on the campus at UCLA in the special collections. He had 120 boxes of papers West did, and they were still releasing them. I think there's more than 200 now. I haven't gone back, and who knows what could be in there.
Yeah.
I don't want to go back because I don't want to be sucked in again. But it was, the whole summer before I found what I just intuited. You had no evidence that, there was a circumstantial case that he was involved in this, but he was never investigated and he denied it. But I just felt like, based on the pattern of stuff that I'd seen that he'd been involved with these criminal cases, there was something else going on in his life, and I found it. That was like the best day of my life, one of them.
Jeez, man. When you're going through all of those, right? You're just sifting through probably this, that, and the other.
I look at every single page, and that's how I found it, because they weren't in a file. That's why he missed it. He probably had graduate students, going through everything. He had misfiled these letters with Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of the program that began in 1952.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they went through the best ones, the most comprehensive ones, went through about 55 or 56. And they were in, I'm actually not going to say what folder they were in, because I don't want people going back. I'm scared they're going to steal them, and I don't know if the university, maybe they've sealed them now that the book came out.
Yeah.
But they were in a file that you would never have expected them in. And that's probably why he never double checked his graduate students' work to make sure they got everything out.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, to think if he remembered and took that out, there wouldn't be any of this, and it wouldn't have come to light about everything going on. People listening right now, do you mind just kind of explaining real quick what MK Ultra was and everything?
So MK Ultra was a secret program run by the CIA. It began in 1952 under Allen Dulles, who was the head of the CIA. And it was a response to what the CIA believed was being done by the Soviets. They were brainwashing people using drugs, primarily LSD, but other drugs too, and hypnosis to try to create Manchurian candidates, which were people who could be programmed to kill and be amnesic of their programming, and sometimes even be amnesic of any act they did. And what the CIA feared was that they needed to have some kind of defense of this happening, especially to Americans who were captured, and there were a bunch of prisoners of war who were captured in Korea in the early 50s, and all of them not all of them, but a bunch of them made statements that we had been breaking the I forget what the code is called, but the International War Code, by using germ warfare on the Koreans during the Korean War. And the government said they were brainwashed. This is a little bit in the book, but that's another area I want to go into more if we do a second book. I'm convinced now that they were actually telling the truth, and we brainwashed them when they came back to say that they'd been brainwashed because West actually was the one who handled. He was one of the doctors who handled them when they came back. I'm not the first one to say that. It's, even the Times has written recently that there's so much evidence we use germ warfare over there. So that program was supposed to be defensive, but it was offensive.
Yeah.
They wanted, if they could do it, the Soviets and the Chinese, we needed to know how to do it and do it better. So from about 52, 53 to 72, 73, it was the most expensive operation the CIA had. They spent more money on it, and they hired academics, and they hired private researchers to test drugs, hypnosis, all kinds of different, sleep deprivation on people. Often, if they were doctors, they're patients without their knowledge. Yeah. They set up safe houses in cities like San Francisco and New York, where they would get prostitutes to lure Johns into the apartments that had two-way mirrors, and the prostitutes would dose the Johns with LSD, and they'd study their behavior, see what the prostitutes could get them to do, and the prostitutes were not real, but they were agents.
Oh, shit. That's correct. Yeah.
And
what a job.
That was called Midnight Climax.
Yeah.
And West was one of these doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So in 72, 73, at the height of Watergate, and this might be in the weeds, but Richard Helms, who then ran the CIA and had been running MK Ultra since 52, 53 under Dulles, but he later became the director, he was indicted for perjury, and he was implicated in a bunch of Watergate stuff, so he had to leave the agency. And when he left, he also, Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the scientific branch of MK Ultra, left with him, and before they left, they destroyed all the records. So to this day, we really have no idea how much was done beyond what was found, and that was a couple years later. Someone within the agency at the State Department knew that there were financial records that were kept in a warehouse, and he got them out so we could see how much money was spent and where it was spent and at what institutions, but there was no record of the experiments, what they achieved, who they did it to, who the patients were. until I found the West records. They're the most
Yeah.
comprehensive that exists to this day, because these two guys destroyed everything else. So it all came out in beginning in 75. There was a Rockefeller Commission that was investigating abuses by the CIA and the FBI, and that's when the congressional investigators were contacted by John Marks, the whistleblower, about these files. And then there's a little drip of information. There were 3 or 4 different congressional investigations into it, where it started coming out and getting reported on the front pages of the papers.
That's just so mind-blowing to think that your own country, your own government would do things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, it was against the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm.
Yeah.
These doctors were, West talked in his letters to Gottlieb about the success of his experiments with LSD on his psychiatric patients, because he said their behavior is already unusual, so I can use this and not raise, people aren't going to say, wait a minute, because they're much easier to experiment with. I mean, can you imagine somebody who's already sick in the head and their most fragile possession is their mind, and these doctors are fucking with it,
Literally fucking with it. And they think that's okay. I mean,
well, they did it, most of them did it, they said, for patriotic reasons. It was a Cold War. They thought that they were saving, but, from what I found out about Wes from studying him, I think he was just a sociopath.
yeah. I mean, even in the book you talk about like how it's like he enjoyed it, right?
Yeah. One of the psychiatrists who worked with him, who suspected he'd been with the CIA, but he never knew it for sure. He said, even without knowing it for sure, the way I described Jolly was he was a benevolent psychopath. So he was very nice on the outside, but inside he was sinister.
Just a crazy fuck. That's so scary to think that we could do that. Do you believe that we do anything like that to this day?
Everybody asks me that. I can't imagine, because I did, they accomplished a lot. And one of the things they got away with in the congressional hearings were putting up this front where they said, you know what, we did do that stuff, we're ashamed of it, and it was a huge waste of manpower and money because we didn't accomplish anything. Nothing worked. That, I believe, was a cover. So I think that the fact that they lied so much about what they didn't accomplish means that, they're probably still doing it.
Yeah.
I have no idea where or how. I mean, even doing it in the United States was illegal in the 50s and 60s because they're not allowed to operate on domestic soil. The CIA has to be overseas.
I mean, just even like after reading the book and just my own thoughts, they have to be doing stuff like that to this day. Yeah. They have to, and especially with technology and everything going on. I mean, it's pretty scary to think what is possible today compared to the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Right.
When you started, going down that rabbit hole, and you found that, you pulled out that file and you read it, what went through your mind? Do you remember what went through your mind?
Well, I found these first letters, and they sounded like what little we knew about the objectives of MK Ultra. They were spelled out, but I didn't know who Sherman Griffith was, who it was addressed to. Excuse me. So I had photocopies made because you can't take anything out, and everything that you have copied there, they have to look at first. So you flag them. And then it's, a graduate student who's working in the collections takes it. And I was like, I hope they're not going to realize that this is something damaging to the university and to this West. But they came back, gave me the copies. And I did think that the Griffith name sounded familiar. So the first thing I did was I was already looking into MK Ultra. There's not a lot of books. Even then there weren't. But the most kind of definitive book about it was the first. It was called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John Marks, who was a whistleblower. I went to his book, looked in the index, and found Sherman Griffith's name. And it's in a footnote where Mark says that Griffith was one of the aliases that Sidney Gottlieb used when he was corresponding. So then I knew it was right. And then I went back and just kept digging, and then I found more and more of these documents.
Yeah,
so I felt great. I mean, it was like, although I knew then, like, all right, now this is going to take on a whole nother realm,
Yes. Were you at any point, like at this point, right? Were you like afraid or scared or like because you opened up Pandora's box. At that moment, you fucking opened up Pandora's box, and for the first time ever, it's like, this is 110% proof of everything that has been going on. What was that for you mentally? Like, was
Well, I felt like
scared
it
or-
was too big for somebody who wasn't, a New York Times reporter.
Yes.
I'm like, wait a minute, why me?
Yeah.
I'm an entertainment reporter who does a little investigative. How did this happen? Am I going to be able to do it? So that was scary. I never was scared for my personal safety. People told me I should be all the time. I was always scared that documents were going to disappear, or the only kind of fear I did have that I guess it was legitimate, but it sounds a little paranoid, but I was worried about people breaking into my apartment to
I
get
that.
stuff. So I would do stuff like, if I went away for a month or something, or a few weeks, I did this with my friend Fitz, the comedian, who lived 2 doors down from me, who by then had a wife and 2 young kids. They had given me the keys to their house at Christmas. They left before I did to go back east. I left a few days later, and I had the keys to their house, and I said, they wanted me to check something, maybe feed a hamster or something. So I bought a couple boxes of my most kind of sensitive documents, and I hid them in his 5-year-old daughter's closet behind a doll collection. And when he came back, he found them, and I hadn't told him. I thought, she's not going to, she had kind of outgrown the dolls up there. It's like, what did you put? And I'm like, oh, I meant to tell you. He goes, you put stuff that you thought that, like, the intelligence people might break into your apartment in my dog. So, like, we can joke about it now. But, yeah, that's the only thing I was scared of, was losing. I also got a safe deposit box. And after that, once I could, afford it, and started putting stuff there, and always having backup. I mean, that's something I was really kind of rigorous about.
And this is before, like, computers and laptops and all that shit started taking off.
No, well, it was the late 90s. It was, computers were around, but it wasn't as easy. Like, I didn't have a scanner or anything like that.
Yeah. You put it in his 5-year-old daughter's box. At that point, how long had you been into, your investigative journalism?
Well, before the Manson assignment, I had done the entertainment investigative journalism. I think I did like about 7 of them or 8 of them over the course of 2 or 3 years. And then this was for Us magazine, which when I was there in the 80s and 90s was a monthly, and now it's a horrible tabloid. It was about the entertainment industry. It was a little too celebrity oriented, but they would let me write long stories about sexism, at a famous show, things like that, or about the abuse of guests on talk shows by producers, without famous people really. And then Jan Wenner, who owned Rolling Stone and Us, right after I moved to LA, like 98, 97, he decided to turn Us into what it is now, which is like a weekly. And I mean, even then, I don't think reality TV was as big as it is. Now it's all reality TV stars, but it was like much shorter, sleazier stories, not well reported. So everybody at Us went and moved over to Premiere, which was a monthly magazine about motion pictures. So where Us was about the entertainment industry in general, Premiere was just movies and Hollywood. So that's when I wanted to go over there. But one of the editors from Us had gone to a magazine called Details, which I think still exists.
Okay.
And I pitched her a story about this unsolved murder of this poor girl from Michigan who came out to L.A. and the year before. I mean, she'd only been killed like a couple months before. And again, this is Leslie Van Buskirk, who was my editor for all these years, and then was the one that gave me the Manson assignment, which changed my life.
Yes.
And she's the one who, when she was at Premiere, she said, this doesn't work for us because it's a crime story, but I found it's always a paragraph. She said, I saw a paragraph in the back of a paper about a girl in Hollywood who was found murdered in a lot in Fresno. And she wasn't identified for like a week and a half, and it turned out that she had won a contest, Miss Hollywood. Fuck. So she said, I think you should pitch that around and do, find out what happened to her. So I pitched it to Details to the woman, another woman from our magazine. And that kind of got me, that was the first, actually the only crime investigative piece I did before Manson. But that's the first time I had to interview cops and, people who were suspects and witnesses. And that was a frustrating thing because I spent like 6 months on that and I didn't solve it. So it's open-ended. And I thought that I knew who did it. And the magazine, probably justifiably so, he was pretty powerful, she said, we don't have enough evidence here to put the finger on him. He'll sue the hell out of us. So I had to modify it and kind of take all the teeth out of it. And that really upset me. And again, they were doing what they had to do. But that was kind of the first thing that I was like, I sometimes wonder when I was doing the Manson thing, if I was still kind of reacting to not being able to get the conclusion to the, her name was Jill Weatherwax story, which now I'm also thinking about going back to all these years later and going up to Fresno and seeing whether now with DNA stuff, because she's still to this day, what was so fascinating about her murder is her body was found 50 years to the day, I think, or a week, that the Black Dahlia, the famous murderer here, her body had been discovered in a lot. You know, they didn't identify her for days, and she was cut in half. And she had the exact same profile as Jill Weatherwax, a Midwestern girl, came to Hollywood, had a little talent, but, you know, all of a sudden you're a little fish in a big sea, and their lives kind of spiral, and then you get murdered. And Black Dahlia is still never solved. So I couldn't believe the coincidence that 50 years later, the exact same story happens with this woman.
Yeah,
So-
but you had said that you thought that you knew who the individual was.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he's still alive. And I keep up with him on Facebook. Yeah.
Man,
If you read the story, people can still figure out that I think it's him, but I didn't keep out the best. I had to keep out the best stuff that would have implicated him because I guess it was too, I don't know, that he would have sued us for libel. And
yeah, but I mean, if all the fingers point at him, like that old saying, if it smells like a duck, if it tastes like a duck, well, it's a fucking duck, right?
Yeah, but you got to be careful when you're putting that out there.
Yeah, if it's an individual that's got the money and higher up and all that stuff. That's something, though, you know, Tom, that after all this time with chaos and everything like that, you should look at possibly going back and looking at that.
Yeah, well, I actually got a call, not a call, I got an email from a criminal defense attorney in Fresno, not about this, but about my book. He just wanted to tell me how much he liked it. He said, if you're ever in Fresno, I'd love to meet you. And I said, well, actually, I did a story up there. I go, how long have you been a criminal defense attorney? And it turned out he was a lot younger than I thought. I think he's in his 30s.
Okay.
So he wasn't in criminal defense then. Now he is. So I sent him the story or a link to it, and he's looking into it, and he's talking to the cops he knows to see if there's been any progress on it, 20 years. Yeah, it was 98 it happened, 97 or 98, so more than 20 years after,
Yeah, I mean, they definitely should be with the advancements in DNA evidence.
Right.
I mean, because listen, man, if whoever it is, right, did something like that, and you said they cut the person in half?
No, the Black Dahlia was cut out.
Okay, but
Jill was stabbed like 20 times or something. And she was found, almost in the Black Dahlia was unfortunately in two different parts, but on her back. And Jill's body, I almost for a minute thought maybe it was modeled, somebody killing her modeling it after the Black Dahlia, but they didn't cut her in half, unfortunately.
Oh, man. Well, I hope that with everything going on, that individual looks at it and you look into it deeper. And so it was after that, right, that then
that story came out, I think, in December of 98. And then March of 99 was a day after my birthday that Leslie called me. And she said, okay, I think I want you to do she goes, we want you to do a story here. And I hadn't written a big feature premiere yet. I'd done a couple of freelance things, actually, even before us. She goes, but we want you to do a story about the 30th anniversary of the Manson murders in August of this coming, summer. And I was like, oh, God, no. Come on, Leslie. And she goes, look, you might not be aware of it now, but now that I've kind of put it in your head, everywhere you go, you hear Manson referenced. Anytime there's a horrible crime or some kind of evil, they always use him as, and sure enough, I did hear it, but I said, but, it's been written to death. What can I say that hasn't already been said? I'd never read Helter Skelter, never been interested. And she said, you want to work here, right? All you need is one feature under your belt and they'll hire you. Full time like I was at the other one. And I said, all right, she goes, you'll find an angle. And I guess I did, but
yeah, you definitely found an angle. How long was it until you started going down that rabbit hole when you started having those conversations with Vincent Bugliosi?
He was one of my first interviews. And he opened up his home to me. And it was great because he hadn't talked about it a lot. The book still sold. He made a TV movie about it, which I up until a certain period, there was another TV movie that came out like 10 years later. His movie was the most viewed TV movie on the case. It was made in the, I think, mid 70s. So he hadn't talked for a while, and I went to it. He agreed to be interviewed for the magazine. I went to his house, spent 6 hours with him, and I think it's how the book. It's in the book, but it's just hinted at in the beginning.
Yeah,
what happens later. But we had a great, relationship in the beginning, and at the end of the day, I thought, I've got the, except for Manson, the most important person on the record with all this great stuff. But even when I was interviewing him, by the end of the interview, 6 hours, I knew that I wasn't getting anything fresh. And I did what we call the Hail Mary pass, which is you ask your subject to go off the record if they can tell you something that you won't attribute to them. And I said to him, I go, Vince, is there anything, because I was still kind of looking for the angles the first week or two. And I said, is there anything you can tell me that's never been reported about this before? And it's something that, at least gives me new information. I said, you know the case better than anybody else. And he kind of thought about it for a minute. And he said, turn off your recorders. And I had 2 recorders because I would use 2 for important ones because I was not good with technology. And I had too many missed. Harrison Ford, I came home and my tape, I had done, he is the most reticent interview in the world. He hates doing it.
Yeah.
His contract, he only has to do 1 magazine per movie. And he was not happy to have to sit and talk to me. And when I got home, there was something the matter with the recorder and you couldn't hear a word he said. So I always use 2 after that. But, so Vince turned off the recorder. Oh,
We've been there.
I did a podcast a year ago, and luckily she was a friend of mine. She never turned the recorder on. We talked for like 2 hours. And she's like, all right, we have to do it all over again. I can't. I said, I can't, not with you. I go, get somebody else that, but because it's just going to
be. Real quick, if you don't, you might see me just peek every second over there. That's just to make sure that it's still recording because I had that happen one time. I pressed record, but there was no SIM card in it, and so it's a lesson learned. It's the worst feeling in the world. Well, not in the world, but fucking terrible.
So he agreed then to tell me something off the record, and if your listeners do read the book, they'll see that I ended up violating my agreement with him by attributing it to him. But that's because 6 years later, he decided to sue me because I was reporting so much or planning to in my book. So he would reference what he told me in letters to my publisher that would have been part of a lawsuit. So the minute he broke it, then I was allowed to use it, which was great. So he made that mistake. So that kind of changed the course of where my reporting went with him telling me something. If he had just said, no, I don't know anything, who knows? Maybe I would have turned the story around in 3 months.
Yeah. Do you think that he knew everything?
Yeah. I was just telling somebody that the other night. I think that was the one among the many frustrating things that happened. I really thought I was going to break him down. And everybody said, he is a sharp attorney. He as he said, he won every murder case he ever tried. He lost 1 jury trial out of the couple hundred that he tried. You're not gonna break him down. I go, but I got to because I got so much of the goods. And if people read the book, they'll see what happened. I didn't get him to admit to anything really, but I got him to go completely crazy and start threatening me and making lawsuits and making up stories to try to smear me and which is what a guilty person does when 100%. You catch them in a lie. So, but yeah, he went to his grave with the secrets. There's still a few people out there that I think know the truth, and they're the ones I'm still kind of wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how can I get to them now, or how can I get them to talk?
Yeah, I mean, do you think the government at this point knows what the hell is going on with all of that?
You mean with what happened all those years ago? The federal government. I've been talking to people the last week or two about this. I think everything was destroyed. We're never going to get any more records unless they're mistakenly left somewhere. And the people who are currently in the CIA, I don't know what the new regimes are told about what the old regimes did. I mean, even every regime is compartmentalized. It's one of the things the CIA does is they only give each other department as much information as they need to get what they need from each department, but they don't tell them everything. So they have what's it called? There's a phrase for it where you can say you don't know honestly. I forget.
Plead the fifth or
no. It's something. It's in the intelligence world.
Okay, yeah.
I'll think of it. I'm getting too old. Anyway, but I think that there are not a lot of people alive from the MK Ultra world. There's hardly any. Somebody did reach out to me and they said they have somebody who worked in MK Ultra who they've been talking to about my book, and they're going to try to get that person to talk to me because he's basically confirmed everything I've said, but he's very reluctant because she's another author and she's worked with him confidentially. She's used his information in her reporting, but she's never exposed him. And she said it took so long for me to get him to trust me, and he's old enough that he might not be around longer than a few months or a year. She goes, I don't know if I can get him to even talk to you off the record, but I said, we'll keep trying. So there's still a few of those opportunities out there, but I think if there's anybody alive, they're the only ones that know. I mean, but about the Manson case in particular, and I talk about this at the end of the book, there's the Tex Watson tapes, which are in a safe. If they're not destroyed, the official word is they're in a safe at the LAPD, and they're Tex Watson's confession to the murders to his attorney, and it's either the number of hours changes constantly. Sometimes it's 8 hours, sometimes it's 20. But in those hours, he describes how and why the murders happened. And if people read my book, they'll see that I believe the official narrative is nowhere near the truth. I believe the real truth is on those tapes. And I was the one that discovered that they were still around and started to almost get access to them. And then the DA swept in and got them actually through a court case in Texas against Watson, and they were going to share them with me. That was the arrangement because I was sharing information that helped them get them. And then as soon as they got them, I still can't believe how naive I was. And people told me, why are you trusting them? I said, well, I don't have a lot of other options because I'm not getting them and they can. But sure enough, as soon as they got them, they cut me out.
It's like, what would you have done, right? What would you have done differently, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I had money, I would have hired a lawyer to sue for the tapes from where they were. It's too complicated to explain now, but the DA's office had all those attorneys on staff, and they got them, and now they won't let anyone hear them. And I think there's a reason they won't let anyone hear them because they would, show the truth of what really happened, why, and how.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you find something?
I just wanted to say, is this the Kent's word of estimative probability, where it says chances about even, probably not, almost certainly not, and impossible, CIA terms of the probability of something happening?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, you're talking about the need. Oh, no, it's called need to know.
There we go.
Is that what you said?
No, but
nope.
I'm glad we got you.
But that worked.
That triggered something. Yeah, it's called need to know. So they only, so when, after the Kennedy assassination, Dulles was fired by Kennedy as the head of the CIA. And a lot of people, including me, believe that Dulles was behind the assassination and the old CIA. The new director, McCone, never knew. He was there, I think, 3 years before he left and was replaced. He never knew MK Ultra existed while it was still operating in the 60s because they didn't want him to know. The only reason Dulles knew was because he started it. But, people within the agency, the only ones who knew what was going on were the ones who were directly involved with it.
Yeah, you go all the way back to the Jfk assassination and that everything that went down. Do you think we will ever find out what exactly? Well,
the weird thing was, Trump had the opportunity in about a year ago or 2 years ago, early into his presidency, this mark came up, and it was, I don't know how many, it was the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, I guess, where Congress had enacted a statute or something, and this was after Oliver Stone's movie about it. Yeah. He and other people lobbied for it, where they were going to make available the CIA's files on Oswald, which everybody thinks that's where the secrets are. but the only person who could permit it or withhold it was the president, and the president happened to be Trump. And people thought that Trump was such a maverick that he would just release everything. And it turned out he only released like a fifth of it, and he let the CIA choose what to withhold, and they withheld like 95%.
Why?
So,
why do you think that
because
is?
there's truth in there, you know.
But you get someone like Trump who's just so off the cuff, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he talk about aliens? Why wouldn't he talk about this? Why wouldn't he talk about what is holding it, right? There's because I mean, in your book, you've opened it up so much, and we look back at all these different times, and it's there is something still all these years later that is holding this fucking shit together. It just boggles my mind and so many people's mind. You know, for you looking back, being able to speak with like Vincent and you know everything that he did. I asked you a question earlier, like, do you think he knew exactly what went down? Like, you think he really knew like every little bit?
The reason I think he did was because when I caught him in really important lies, you know, for instance, Reeve Whitson, who's an important character in the book, who was an undercover intelligence guy who claimed to the people who were closest to him, who have infiltrated the Manson family and knew that the murders were going to happen, did nothing to prevent them. That was his dying regret. Also said that he had been to the crime scene after the killers left, but before the police arrived there. Reeve brought in witnesses to Vince, and witnesses that Vince couldn't get to talk, wouldn't talk to him, he couldn't find. Reeve was a special guy, brought them in, and his name is in the testimony, because usually when you have a really important witness, the defense wants to know how the prosecution found out about you, how the police found out about you. So again and again, it was, well, Reeve Whitson came to me, and Hatami, the most important witness, said, and he threatened to have me deported unless I went in and met with Bugliosi. So he testifies about Reeve and Bugliosi and him being together. So Reeve was a linchpin in my book and in this case. And when I asked Vince about Reeve, he said he didn't remember, he didn't know who that was. And you know, there's a bunch of these. So that made me, that and some other stuff about the Smiths, David and Roger Smith, made me convinced that Vince did know the truth. And then what, you know, and I didn't really go into this in the book, but we did add a new footnote to the paperback edition. I don't know which one you have.
Okay.
But it's an end note. You know, Vince spent 20 years, as long as I did, writing his opus about the Kennedy assassination, where he took on every single conspiracy and, in his words, discredited them to show that Oswald acted alone. Now, I think it's a whole piece of propaganda, and I think he knows it too. But I believe he was compromised since before the Tate LaBianca to do the government's bidding. And that book, I think, was something that he had to do to pay off of, you know, a lot of debts that he had for stuff he got into in his own life, trouble he got into in his own life.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a slippery slope, man. I everything that, you know, in the book, everything that he shared with you and the conversations, and then, you know, what you just brought up, it just, I don't know, all of it kind of, it makes sense, you know? And I
was telling you before we were on mic, I think, that I have an Instagram page where I'm putting up audio excerpts and documents and stuff. And I put up something last week, which was an interview by an attorney with a woman named Virginia Cardwell, who was Vince's mistress in the 70s, who he beat up because she wouldn't get an abortion of his baby. Now, that sounds tawdry and ancillary, but it wasn't, because what he did was, when she reported it to the police, went with her bruised face. He went back to her house the next day with his secretary, held her hostage for 3 or 4 hours until she agreed to go to the police and say she'd made up the charge. And he said, I will make sure you'll be arrested, but I'll have the DA drop the charges a few days later. So she's telling this whole story to her attorney, and she did sue him in civil court a year later, and he paid her about 10 grand to keep quiet. And so none of this would come out. So in this particular instance, he lied to not only to the media, he called the papers and said, I don't even know her. You know, she was a disgruntled client trying to extort me for $100 legal fee. But he'd been having an affair with her I've talked to all the people who were around at the time, and he did beat her the hell out of her. So he lied to the papers and to the police, which is a crime.
Yes, it is.
And he had done that, and this is all in the book, 3 or 4 years earlier, before the Tate LaBianca case, when he decided that his milkman was the father of his firstborn son.
Wow.
So he was a really, let's say, complicated sociopathic person
Yes.
who was compromised. I mean, when they found out about this first case with the milkman, he was stalking the milkman, threatening him. And that's another good thing about when the book came out, the milkman's daughter. I had actually interviewed the milkman, and he said, all I want to do is confirm everything that was reported. I don't want to add anything to it. And I said, okay, as long as you'll do that, I have enough of my own court documents and stuff that I can put it in there. But after my book came out, his daughter, probably shouldn't, well, I'll tell it, I don't care. She got in touch with me, and she said, the stuff that came out in the public record was nowhere near as insane as what Vince put my parents through. She goes, I have so much more to tell you and show you. She goes, my parents are dead now, so I can tell you the truth about what really happened. She goes, for example, he picked me up from school when I was 5, 6 years old. Bugliosi took her to a toy store, bought her all these toys, anything she wanted, then brought her to home, put her on the sidewalk in front of the house with this big pile of toys so the parents could see what he'd done, that they knew that he had access to their daughter. I mean, he was a sick puppy, Vince. He was, and the DA's office knew about that. He should have been disbarred. Actually, he should have been arrested and prosecuted, but they kept him there, and they helped keep it quiet. It didn't come out until the mid-'70s when it was first found out.
Holy shit. How is that even possible? I feel like in today's day and age, they would be fired so fast, but maybe not. But
well, I think they needed somebody in there that then had to do their bidding. And Neville Younger, and people can read about it in the book, was a district attorney, and he was an ex-FBI guy, OSS, CIA.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, the one who was pulling all the strings for the government and pulling Vince's strings. But so I put up the first part of the tape as her describing the beating by Vince.
Yeah.
And then either today or tomorrow, maybe tonight or probably tomorrow, I'm going to put up the second part where she talks about him coming back to her apartment the next day and keeping her and coercing her into going back to the police. And I mean, he had a secretary with him who played with this woman's 5-year-old son in the other room while Vince is in the bedroom screaming at her, threatening her, begging her, saying, you have to do this. It's going to ruin my life. There'll be a trial. I'll get disbarred. We have to lie to the police. So you'll hear that tape next when I get that up in the next day or two, because they've never been heard before, these audio tapes.
Oh, my God. Yes, sir.
Can I ask why?
You ask him. I'm going to go bathroom real quick.
Yeah, please. Why Vince? In the sense of, do you think that he's not the first person to go digging in JFK files? Do you think he was the first person to go far enough? But why did
he get chosen, you mean?
Yeah.
I think he was a really bright, by all accounts, law student, head of his class, I think at Loyola, got into the DA's office, and I think it was because of the milkman case. When they found out how crazy he was, but still brilliant, and they kind of had leverage over him then, because he should have been, like I said, prosecuted and arrested. They kept it quiet.
Right.
Then, in exchange, he had to do their bidding. Yeah. And I think he kind of sold his soul then. And rather than saying, prosecute me, I shouldn't have done it, I'm mentally ill.
Right.
He told me himself, it's in the book, he said, when we had our final confrontation at his house, he said, my wife has been trying to get me in to see a psychiatrist for years. And, maybe I should, because he was trying to get me to back, he would go back and forth, like try to be my friend and then threaten me. And he goes, maybe I'll do that. Almost like saying, if you don't publish this and I show you that I've been to a shrink.
That's it.
And then the milkman's wife, it's in the book, when Vince sent his wife to the milkman's house to beg them to give them a blood sample or something from the milkman so Vince could have it tested. Sure. Vince's wife, Gail, said to the milkman's wife, she goes, my husband is mentally ill. She said, he won't stop until he gets this. I know that your husband didn't father my child. Yeah. Just do this and it'll all be over. And the milkman's wife is, we're not going to do it. Leave our house. Stop bothering us. Good. Yeah. So, I mean, that was it. He was mentally ill. I shouldn't say he was a sociopath. I actually shouldn't say anything. I'm not a doctor, but you look at the patterns.
But there's something there.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm most curious about is, say, because he was brilliant in a sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Hitler was.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. And do you think? I mean, that behavior of coming back and forth, that's the behavior of a desperate man.
Mm-hmm.
I can question. Do you think it was theatrics? Do you think that he was?
You mean with me?
Yeah.
Oh, there was
Because,
definitely
he's 7 feet tall, so most of his life he's understood that he was intimidating.
Oh yeah, he knew.
Right?
Oh yeah,
He knew that.
Yeah.
And to come up to somebody, and I love hearing about your childhood, about how you brought a homeless man in, and because I think it further, for me, digs deeper that you are somebody that says, I won't be intimidated because I will follow whatever your drive is at that moment. I'm going to follow it.
Mm-hmm.
So he was an intimidating man where the majority of the world would give him what he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He was intimidated himself. Do you feel that it was theatrics, or do you think that he was
With me?
concerned? Yeah.
Oh no, he was concerned. I mean, he really, he was going to say that I was a pedophile.
Yeah.
And he did. This is another one of his patterns. So when the milkman went public, what happened was Vince ran for office after Helter Skelter and the success.
Yeah.
You know, he had a best-selling book. He had a lot of money, but his dream was to be the president.
Right.
So he wanted to run for office. So he ran for the district attorney of Los Angeles, left the DA's office, and when the milkman and his wife, you know, saw that he was actually running to be the most powerful person in law enforcement in Los Angeles after what he'd done to them 5 years earlier, they went to his opponent and said, you need to know what he did to us 5 years ago. And the opponent was like, great, let's have a press conference. And it took a while for him to persuade the milkman and his wife to get, you know, to go before a microphone. But they did it, and that's why he lost that election. Yeah. And I'm sorry, what was the question that made me?
No, I was asking if you thought that Vince was playing
theatrics.
His behavior was very desperate.
Yeah. So then with them, when they went public with that, his response was, and this is so crazy, I love it. He said, no, here's what really happened. He was our milkman, Mr. Wiesel, and in 1965, $200 or $100, I can't remember, cash went missing from our kitchen. So I was just investigating him to see whether he had robbed the kitchen when he delivered the milk. And as the opponent said, and the media said, Bill, all right, there's a couple reasons that's wrong. The Pasadena, where they lived in Pasadena, we went to the police. You never reported this. Why did you take it upon yourself? That's the first thing. The second thing was you were investigating it till 1968. The statute of limitations on a robbery without a person involved, where you're just stealing from a house, would have run out. So if you found out that he did steal $200, you couldn't have prosecuted him. So that whole but that's what he did to this couple who were a milkman and his wife. He smeared them in the press to save himself. With Virginia Cardwell, he allowed her to go and say that she did make the story up. She was just upset because he wouldn't refund her $100 for one consultation. And she lied to the police at his behest. So he used her in the same way, you know, to protect himself. And then with me, he was going to tell the world that I had been sleeping with teenage boys.
Yeah.
And when he said it, I laughed. 'Cause I'm like, Vince, you don't know that I know your history now, that that's the first thing you do is you try to intimidate and scare your person using your connections with the DA's office. And he even said he had evidence of this from like 10 years before. And I said, all right, well, so Vince, why didn't you go to the police with this evidence? If you thought I was actively committing a crime, you got all your friends in the cop. Well, I go, then you couldn't have been serious. You're making it up. That's what you do.
That's exactly what he did.
One final question.
Yeah, no.
that I've been kind of pondering, and even going through the book, I was pondering, what are your thoughts about LSD? About
The power of it?
Yeah, or I mean, as much as you know, it's really good research. I mean, it's not direct research about LSD, but you know enough to really...
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot in there in the book about it, but there's a whole chunk of stuff that I found that we didn't get in the book, and I do want to... Oh God! Every time I do these interviews, I start thinking, why don't I just go home and start the second one? I mean, they were doing research with LSD in '65 in Los Angeles, where they were trying to find out why some people were more susceptible to having a complete personality change with one LSD experience and others weren't. I do have a little bit in the book. They were looking for the trigger, whether there were they had a predisposition, something in their psychological or chemical makeup in their brain to make one person all of a sudden be like, a guru after, all the believing in other kinds of gods and wanting to change their whole life. And another person, like me, I did it 2 or 3 times. I didn't have any dramatic personality changes. So I think it depends on the user. And I think the science is out there saying the same thing. But what fascinated me was the people that were doing this research in 65, and this isn't in the book. I don't even think I've talked about it in an interview because it's deep in the weeds. But the guy who was in charge of that lived in there were a bunch of shacks that were converted into like nice, not nice, but relatively nice bungalows at the end of Topanga Canyon Boulevard at the beach. And they were all torn down after the 10 went up. People consider them an eyesore, but from like the 50s until they were torn down in the early 70s, they were a bohemian community that was occupied by like writers, academics, surfers, hippies. And the first LSD use outside of the military and the federal government was through this guy named Paul Rowan, who brought it to them he was using it in research for the CIA, and he shared it with the community there. And there were like, I think 100 people, like 20 homes or something, 100 off and on through the years. And during that period, Tex Watson, before he met Manson, moved into the bungalow next to Paul Rowan and was there with that group for about 6 or 8 months. And then he became involved with Manson. So then Manson and the girls started coming. And that guy's research, his whole life scholarship up to that point and a few years beyond, was determining which people were more susceptible to being manipulated and used by a powerful type person than others. We kept all that out because it was such a dense chapter. And it's one of those, I think it's the only one that Dan and my collaborator and I had a kind of serious disagreement about. But at that point, we were already getting behind on another deadline. But that's something I gotta use because I have all those people that were there and saw all this who spoke to me. And now a lot of them are dead. And I interviewed Paul Rowan about it, but not about that part because when I interviewed him, and this is where it gets in the weed, he actually was interviewed by the LAPD because of the Tate LaBianca murders and his knowledge of some stuff. And I didn't know about his history with the CIA. I just found his name in the file. So he told me something that made no sense whatsoever. And it wasn't until a couple years later when his name popped up like West did in this research. And then I found out that Watson lived next door to him. And that's why the police wanted to talk to him. And then he was dead. And I couldn't interview him again. So that was one of those things where I got beat by Father Time. I thought I turned my phone.
That is incredible.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff like that.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm just trying to.
There we go. Yeah, I mean that part of the chapter that obviously didn't make the book, that does point a lot of fingers in the direction of kind of where it all
that was
started
actually
in the civilian world.
Yeah, and at one point with my publisher, the first one that ended up canceling and suing me for the return of the advance, when I brought that to them, when things were starting to get trouble between me and them, and they saw that, they said, okay, you get a couple more years. That's that important. But yeah, it's complicated why it didn't end up in the book. I think it was more because I knew there was going to be a follow-up and I'd be able to flesh it out more because there's still a lot more stuff I need to do to get, to kind of polish it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have another question?
No, I'm just fascinated.
I mean, this whole story, everything. And what I find, what's most fascinating to me is you keep on pushing. You just kept on pushing the entire time. I mean, 20 years to come out with this. And I said in the beginning, this masterpiece, because it opens the eyes and ears to the American and the world population of what happened during all of this, because we're, prior to your book coming out and, whispers around, it was like helter skelter, but you've proven time after time all the shit that Vincent Bugliosi did, and how can we even trust his narrative?
Yeah.
To this day, do you hold any grudges against him, like ill will for? I mean, come on, he said the stuff about the teenage boys. I mean, that's just fucking gross.
That pissed me off.
Yeah.
And it didn't surprise me. I mean, it surprised me because I knew it was all going to fall apart.
Yeah.
It did with the other two, with the mistress and the
Yeah.
woman. And the other thing is, I know there were other cases like those that I didn't find out about. But my grudge is that he died against him is that he died. I was really pissed off because and a lot of people who criticize the book and me think that I waited until he died to publish, which is insane because I was broke, and I'm still broke because I'm still paying back my publisher for the first advance and the magazine. So it's like, why would I mean, I wanted him to be accountable. I knew it would have been a much harder fact check with the new publisher who did the book, that since he was dead, there was much less of a threat. But, what I found out during the fact checking process was his wife could have sued us because she's the heir to his estate, including Helter Skelter. So they said they did rigorously fact check the stuff, everything about him, which is almost the whole book. And they didn't make me change anything. And because I thought, I told them, I said, my biggest regret is not getting this done before he died. Because he wouldn't answer the questions. I thought, well, once the book's out, he's going to have to answer them when other people come to him. And they said, well, actually, we have to worry about his wife because she can say that you and I think I did, devalued his book.
Oh, fuck yeah.
But I haven't heard a peep from her.
No, not at all.
And I know that she knows everything he did wrong. And I shouldn't say this, but I don't even care anymore. She's one of the people that I've often thought, now that he's gone, maybe I should knock on the door and see if she'll talk to me.
You should.
Because I know, where she lives, but I don't know if she's still there.
You definitely should. Go for it.
I'm so sorry, but that was something that stood out to me in the prologue itself.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I'm focusing so much on this. But
it's all right.
But you described her in such a way where she almost hung her head down and then went to go to bed.
Oh, yeah.
And that part stuck out to me
Oh,
throughout
good.
the entire book.
Yeah.
Because it never really came back around.
Yeah.
But I felt that you were trying to tell everybody.
Yeah.
She knows more than she's saying.
Yeah, and I shouldn't. I'll tell you guys the story after.
If
Let him go.
Let us know only if we don't have to cut it out. That's my only 2 cents. I would love to.
Yeah.
But if we got to cut it out.
Yeah, I'll tell you after. Let's just say she's suffered a lot more than I gave any indication of in the book. I mean, I found out stuff since. I just think, I don't know why she stayed with him all those years. Maybe she was really in love with him, but the stuff he put, she had to go accompany him when he's stalking and threatening the milkman.
Yeah.
When Virginia Cardwell happened, she had to stand up with him at a press conference and say, my husband would never cheat on me, as if she'd know, and she knew. And that's the stuff I know. She knew about everything he was doing. So she also made a pact with the bad guy, and I don't mean him, I mean the devil or whatever. And I don't know how pleasant her life could have been. And I saw it when I was over there. She always seemed exhausted, especially when she had to hear him spouting off this nonsense to me.
This bullshit.
So,
it's
and she was a nice woman.
Well,
I liked her.
But that's an ongoing tale with relationships. The woman or man standing by their significant other. But as you talk, I just think more and more like to find out more.
Yeah.
She has the answers. I don't know if all of them, but she has some answers. And so knocking on her door, wherever her door is, I don't think it's a bad idea.
She's gonna have a pistol and
or maybe she'll just feel this sense of like
she
obligation.
wants to unload.
Yeah.
And
Guilt.
And since I haven't heard from her, maybe that's my kind of signal to.
Come on, yeah, absolutely. If she was like her husband, what would she be doing? She would be suing the shit out of you, making up crazy fucking stories. But instead, there is nothing.
Silence.
Yeah, and all this stuff has to come out. And a man like that who has continually put people down, put himself before them, create all these false narratives, it must come out. And everything that happened with the Tate LaBianca murders. I mean, it just, there's been enough time where I would hope that the truth would finally come out. And for you, in the beginning, you were like, I don't know, right? And I totally respect that. At this point in your life, what do you want to see?
Yeah, I'd love to see those tapes released.
Yeah.
I don't want to get optimistic about some of the new leads I have that are very specific and easy, not easy to report. They'll still take time and finessing, but I actually have places to go and people to talk to that might have some answers that will be important puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff I'm working on now. I just want, I want more information, which is actually, I think, how we ended the book. Manson just, the book ends with Manson saying to me, "You just want information, man."
Yes.
Yeah, duh.
What do you think he knows a lot? Like, or
Well, he's dead.
I mean, no, I mean, at that time, do you think he knew
I
a
think,
lot?
that's the one thing I go back and forth on. Sometimes I think he had to know everything.
Yeah.
Other times I think, no, if it worked, he has no idea why he did what he did or how he got. Actually, this is something that's good. I have been getting information from people who are obsessed with the case. And there are people who know more about this than I do, even with my 20 years, who are just amateur like detectives who've always believed there's something wrong. And there's a couple of them who've gotten in touch with me with interviews that I somehow missed where Manson talked about being protected from 1967 on.
Yeah.
That he said, I could do no wrong, and it was thanks to the feds. And I'm like, how did I miss that? I mean, one of the reasons was I didn't want to put too much of anything he said, because he's such a disinformation artist.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff that I didn't know about, a few things, was so specific, I would have put it in if I had it at the time.
Well, this was before your story came out. So
before the book came out.
Right. And so before the book came out,
he had said that, but I had never, he'd done so many interviews.
Yeah.
Some of them, actually, I watched or listened to so many of them before any of that possibility came into my head. I didn't, for a year, think that he might have been an informant or have a special relationship. That was slowly coming.
Yes.
So I think what happened was I just saw so many in the beginning on video or listened to so many that I forgot. I didn't pay attention to the little crazy things like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the little things, right?
And
that
people are
definitely add
reading my book and they're going back and re-listening,
Yeah.
looking at, and they're coming to me with this stuff.
They're gonna find a lot of answers. Have you ever seen that documentary called "Don't Fuck with Cats" on Netflix?
Oh, I heard about it. My nephew loves it, but I haven't seen it.
Yes. I mean, it's different stories, right?
Yeah.
But it's something that was put out there, and then the people online, they just started tracking, and they fucking figured out and solved the case, right? And so now that with the internet and this wide expansion of just information, you're at this point, right? The book came out 2019, right?
Yeah.
2019, right? What is it like now? Because I know that you were on Rogan, and how did all of that come about? Like what, because Greg Fitzsimmons is your friend, next door neighbor. When did that come to play?
Rogan, every time, and I love it when he plugs the book, and he's not deliberately plugging it. It's just on his mind, and he starts talking about it and saying wonderful things. But he always begins by saying, because he knows all of his listeners know Fitz. Yeah. So he said, whoever his guest will say, so you know Fitz, right? And he goes, so Fitz had his neighbor who for 20, and I'm like, I wasn't his neighbor. I was like, one of his best friends. Yeah. And he became my neighbor in New York years before I did. I got him, and I knew him through another comic friend, got him into my building, and then he actually got the apartment next to me because the people were leaving, and I got him that lease. And I joke that I put roofs over his head twice in New York, and then I helped him get his first place in L.A. He came shortly after I did. But Rogan makes it seem like Fitz just was interested in this next door neighbor who was working. And I was like, no, we have all. I go, Fitz, you got to correct that. Yes. Tell him. Fitz, like, you're a few of his texts. I'm not going to bother him about that. But yeah, so Fitz. What's interesting is before my book came out it came out in June of 2019, I think, or June, I think. Months before, Little Brown's gearing up for the publicity thing, and Fitz volunteered this. I didn't ask him. And I didn't know much about Rogan except, he has this wildly popular podcast and he calls everybody bro, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to do with WWE or something. Or MMA. Or
UFC.
UFC, whatever. Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. And I knew him from
June, I'm sorry, is when it was released.
June, thank you.
June 2019.
So Fitz said, this is so up Joe's alley. I'm going to tell him about it. So Fitz, I think he told me he called him and emailed him. And I didn't push it because at that point, what little I knew about Rogan had to do with Alex Jones.
Yes.
And I thought, if he has Alex Jones on there and then me, I don't want to be in the same stage, you know. So I didn't really care that much. But I did mention it to Little Brown, and they said, you know, we haven't had our authors there. He's got a massive following, but they didn't push it too much. So, and then Rogan never got back to Fitz. And Fitz says to this day, he goes, I think I only communicate with Rogan when he reaches out to me. I don't think he reads his texts, his emails. You know, he runs everything.
Yeah.
So a year later, Fitz is doing Rogan. So I was on in April. I think he was doing him like in March. And he said, this time I'm bringing a synopsis of your book. I go, give him the book. He goes, no, I don't want to. I just want to give him a synopsis. Do you have a good? And I said, yeah. And he said, I know the minute he kind of focuses on it, he's going to book you. So that night after he taped his show, Fitz calls me up and he goes, I don't owe you anything anymore for those roofs. You owe me now. I go, are you joking? He goes, no, he's calling you tonight. He wants to book you.
Holy shit.
I'm like, oh, fuck, I hate being so obligated now to you, Fitz. I go, but I have to get more views than you. And I did.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he's been on so often, I don't think people get too excited. I still count and compare.
Yeah. What was that experience like? Because I mean, Joe Rogan is.
Oh, so he texted me that night, and he said, "I can't believe," and he couldn't believe he had never heard about the book. So the book, you know, we didn't get as much publicity as we thought we would.
Yeah.
We didn't get the sales we thought. We didn't, you know, in the New York Times, you never know what they're going to do. They didn't review it. They did do a piece about me for the style section of all sections, but it was okay. It got interest. I was okay with it. I was just so glad that anybody bought it. And, you know, I did some podcasts. I did a little bit of TV, not too much. But things were really kind of waning off in the winter. And then, so then I get the text from Rogan. And I actually was still a little apprehensive because of the Alex Jones thing. Yeah. So I thought I better look him up a little. So he texted me, he said, I really want you on the show. Can you talk to me tomorrow? I'm going to call you. I said, yeah, sure. So I emailed the people at Little Brown who were kind of a little the same way I was, a little apprehensive too. And they were like, are you kidding? Do it. You have to do it.
Yeah.
No. And then I found out actually just a week ago, I had lunch with Annie Jacobson, who's an author who writes books about military intelligence. She's done like 5. And one of them was on Area 51, UFOs. The other one's on the use of psychics by the CIA. The last one was called Vanish, Kill. She's going to kill me. I really like her. So she was a Little Brown author, and she told me at lunch the other day, she said, I was the first Little Brown author to go on Rogan, and she was on like 4 or 5 months before me. She said they learned that you don't say no to Joe Rogan because he changed my book sales like overnight. And so I knew I had to do it. And then he didn't call me the next day. But then I saw he was in the newspapers because that was the first time on one of his podcasts he said he wasn't going to vote for Biden because he thought Biden was senile. And he implied he was going to vote for Trump. So there was a ton of attention. And I thought, oh, now I'm never going to hear from him. He's distracted. But it was like a day late, and then he booked me for a week later, and he said he was, I think he said 11 chapters in, and he said, but I promise you I'm going to finish the last couple chapters before I see you. That's what I found out he hadn't done. And in a way it worked, I think, to my benefit. You know, I was hoping, you always hope they've read the whole book. Yep. Because you don't want to have to do too much expositional, you know, explaining and stuff. But the way he interviewed me, he hadn't gotten that far, so I'd start to talk about it, and I said, well, I don't want to spoil the ending for you. And it wasn't at all, you know, deliberate or planned, but it worked with him. And then I think it made a lot of people want to know, like read
Yes,
the book
that's smart.
to the end. So it was a great experience. And just like everyone said, so that it would change everything about the book, even my life. So he announced it, a week or so before. He had a guest on. And I guess he had actually talked about it once before, and I had heard that. But when I saw that his things were 3 hours long, I'm like, I'm not going to listen to 3 hours. Now I actually do, because sometimes he talks for 10 minutes about it, He had a CIA guy on there that he gave him homework to read the book before he came on. So when he announced it on one of his podcasts, all of a sudden, my phone's lighting up, just, and everything sold out. So this was in like early April before I was on. And this was a frustrating thing. They couldn't replenish the stock at Amazon because of COVID. So all the bookstores are closed. It's early April. And Amazon is only restocking essential stuff. So nobody could get the book unless they bought the digital or the audio. So the audio sales did really well.
That's how I read it, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people want it in their hand. And what I want is people to have the end notes. They're the most important pages to me. I should have brought you a book.
Damn.
It's 60 pages of my research. And I actually add, I cheat, which is why we want end notes. Stuff that we couldn't fit in the narrative, then I put in the end notes. Like, I'll explain more.
Shit, I did not, because I did the audio version.
Yeah, I don't like it that much. A lot of people love it, so that's fine.
Well, yeah, I'll let you continue.
So then, so nobody could get the book, and then I was on a week later, and that's when like my social media blew up, when I was actually on the show. And then ever since then, the sales have been fantastic. And if they lag off a little, it almost always gets brought back up. Because he'll talk about, I haven't listened to, I tried to listen to 10 minutes of Kanye today, and I can't listen to it.
What do you think it is what do you think is the power of Rogan? Like, why does he
actually, that's somebody should do a thesis paper on that.
So
I like him a lot. He's a great guy. He's smart, but 3 hours with every guest. I don't think I should have been on there 3 hours.
Yeah, for you, because I obviously listened to your podcast on there. It was by far one of the most engaging ones, where you're just sitting there and you're driving your car, you're working out, you're taking a shower, whatever, right? And you're like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, are you serious? Are you serious? And I guess it did work to your narrative that he didn't read the complete book, because you were able to kind of give out more and then like cut things off, right? Yeah. Which is fantastic. I
don't like to name drop, but I met Rick Rubin a couple nights ago. I had dinner with him.
Good for you.
He listened to it twice, the podcast.
Yes.
And I'm like, I tried to listen to it, and I said I couldn't. I know what I said.
Yeah.
I listened to the first 5 minutes and then the last 5 minutes, because that was at the time before it was public that he was COVID testing his guest. And that freaked me out. You're asking what it was like. The night before the interview, he texts me and says, hey, Tom, you want a COVID test tomorrow?
It's at the beginning, right?
Yeah, he said, I have somebody that comes in and tests me, and you'll have the results in 15 minutes. And I'm like, I wrote him back and I said, and if they're negative, does that mean I don't get to come on the show? Then I don't want to do it. And he said, no, of course not. You'll get on the show. But then for 24 hours, this is when I didn't really know if it was a death sentence or not.
Yeah, Then
I was distracted about, I'm trying to focus on, all right, what do I want to talk about? What should I bring up? And then I thought, if I get a positive and go on, there's no way I'm going to be able to focus on the conversation. Yeah. So luckily I got a negative. And at the end of it, and I didn't plan it, but at the end of the interview, I said to him, he was thanking me for coming on. I said, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the COVID test. And then Joe goes, he looked startled, and he said, oh, yeah, so for those of you who don't know, because I've been testing guests. And then I thought, oh, fuck. And then I thought, I shouldn't have said that.
Wow.
But he was fine when I left, but I was driving home thinking, he could cut it out, or maybe he's pissed off.
Nah.
But then it didn't matter, because the next day, this guy who recently or since then has been accused of Me Too, Chris D'Elia. So he was the next guest. He had been done already, and then his show was on before mine. So when he was on, actually before his show aired, he told an interviewer about it all. And then Rogan got a ton of press for, people were pissed off because you couldn't get tests. It was hard to get them then. And that he was testing, and he had already said, So and then Aaliyah, whatever his name is, he talked about it on his podcast. So then I knew I was off the hook. So it wasn't going to be my responsibility.
I'm sorry. I don't get that. It's like, it was a crazy time, during that experience, but mad respect to him to be able to do that. Right. I mean, but yeah, I mean,
and now I guess Jamie, his guy, has it, right?
Yeah. Jamie was just diagnosed. So he brought in Redman to, do the Kanye
So who
West.
is Redman? Because I saw him today, I think, on the Kanye one. Is he I thought he was a comedian or something.
Yeah, he is a comedian.
Oh, he's not a producer? Or?
No, he is. Here, let's pull him up real quick, but I'll show you because I don't want to talk out of context. But so he started the podcast with him. And
who started it? Oh, you mean Rogan?
Rogan.
Oh, in the very beginning.
Yeah, in the very beginning. Here, hold on. Damn it. Joe Rogan, and this will explain it all. Because I hate talking out of my ass. Here, hold on one second. So, yep. So, since the very beginning, I don't know the whole story why Redban left, right? But if you look at Joe Rogan Experience #1, it says Brian Redban, right? Okay. So when he started the podcast, he started with him, and then whatever happened.
He's a comedian, not a fighter.
He's a comedian, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't there a fighter that has a similar name? That's on a lot.
Shit, I know who you're talking about.
Red something.
Whatever it is,
yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Rogan told me he's the one who actually first told him about my book.
Oh shit!
Before Fitz did, but he said he was only half listening, and it wasn't until Fitz sold him on it. Yeah. But that's a guy, because then he did have him on after me, and they talked about it.
Damn it! I know who you're talking about, and I can see him in my head. But so that's who he started with, and so since Jamie got freaking tested, right, or tested positive. And I'm sure he had the Kanye West, the Matthew McConaughey one all booked up, all of that stuff. And he needed a producer. So he probably flew him out. Because I haven't listened to his podcast for like the past week or so, because I was listening to David Goggins' book, and then I was listening to Matthew McConaughey.
David Goggins?
David Goggins is a Navy SEAL who it is.
Because he has lots of Navy SEALs on it.
Yeah, he is. But this David Goggins is by far one of the just most insane dudes on the face of the planet. What he just shows you that most human beings only work at 40% of their full potential.
Those shows always depress me.
Yeah, no, but his book was amazing because
what's it called?
It's Can't Hold Me Down. I'll have him look it up. But hold on. It is by far one of the best books I've ever read. But so I've been reading David Goggins' book, and then I started reading Matthew McConaughey's new book, which was it's really freaking good.
Oh,
it's
really?
good.
Yeah, he's a funny guy.
Yeah, well, so I do audiobooks because you're like talking about reading,
do them
right?
now too. Yeah,
it's because like I do so many different things, right? And the time it takes to sit down and read a book, I don't have it.
It's harder.
But I do have time when I'm driving, when I'm working out.
You live in Santa Clarita. You got to drive all over.
No, but my office is in Valencia, so it's totally fine. But when I'm in the shower, so I can knock out 2 hours, 3 hours a day in a book, at least.
I'm embarrassed to say it. I read about 1 or 2 books a year until Fitz, who started telling everybody you got to get into Audible or whatever.
Yes.
So I started about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's the same thing when I'm driving.
Yep.
When I'm at the gym, running, whatever, and I'm getting through about 15. I'm almost done Moby Dick right now for the first time in my life, and that's a monster.
That is a monster.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, I do 3 to 5 books a month every single month, on top of the freaking Joe Rogan podcast, on top of other podcasts I listen to. I do not listen to my own podcast. I cannot. It's hard to listen to myself, right? Yeah. He knows that. But that being said, it is so amazing that you went through that experience with Rogan, because it helped transform.
Yeah, I mean, it made the book have an audience it wasn't getting, and all these people that I've been meeting, like a lot of famous people now are getting in touch with me, and it's just because of Rogan that they know about the book. Yeah, and it wouldn't have been if I knew on paper he had a big audience, but I really had no idea the impact until I did it.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to see. And I think Rogan's power is that his ability to it doesn't matter if you're this side or you're that side, right? It doesn't matter if you're left, right, up, down, or middle. It's about who we are as human beings and this open dialogue. And if we can sit someone down, you know, myself and an Alex Jones, myself and a fucking Donald Trump, right? It doesn't matter. Myself and a Kanye West. If we can sit down and have a conversation, right? We're going to find a lot more in common for the most part. I truly believe that. And so with his podcast, you see that. And so I think for me, that's what it connected, right? And for me, him constantly talking about working out, taking care of yourself, being more open-minded, you know, psychedelic drugs, like all these different things. And I think it checks a lot of boxes with a lot of different people.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of the Post Malone one. I was like, wow, those guys. And that was the other thing. So when I sat down with him, you know, I think he likes to get high with his guests. And I don't smoke pot. I haven't for a long time, but I've done all kinds of other DRUGSs. But not pot. I just don't like it. And he has a big, I don't know if you see it in the thing, but he has a big fat joint in a little plate between you. And he's kind of looking at it in the beginning. And I'm like, so all I have to do is ask, and then he'll be able to do it with me.
Yeah.
And he does ask when you get, like, when I got there, he asked if I wanted, like you, like, want a drink or something, because it's a full bar. He did in the other place. And I love to have a nice drink and relax, but I thought I got to be on point with him. It was 1 in the afternoon that I think I did it, and I thought, if we're doing this 3 hours and he's as specific as I think he's gonna be, I don't want to enjoy myself and start boozing. So I said no thanks. I just had some water, but when I saw him and Post Malone, I think they said they were shrooming.
They were eating mushrooms, all that.
Yeah, and he talked to him for like, I didn't watch
4 hours.
I only watched like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but like they both were so clearly.
Yeah, they were fucked up, you know. But that is the beautiful thing, and I'm the same way. Where it's like, you know, if my guest, you know, wants to have a beer, we'll have a beer. If my guest wants to smoke a joint or a blunt, we'll smoke a joint or a blunt. You know, but it's up to the guest, right? Because I'm not going to go full tilt, you know, if they're not. And at the same time, this podcast did. Like all podcasts mean a lot to me, but this podcast meant a lot to me. It really did. He knows. My wife knows. My whole family knows that this. You know, I never imagined in a million years when I started this a year ago that I would have met someone like him. But on top of that, had all these amazing guests. Being able to speak to someone like yourself, it's just it's blown my mind. And so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come sit with someone like myself and Daniel. We really appreciate it.
You guys are easy. I mean, it's a lot easier to talk about myself. I mean, that was actually one thing I was disappointed about with Rogan, but I'm glad he wanted to focus on the book. I guess it helped, but I thought he was going to ask me Fitz stories because I've got great Fitz stories, you know, and I thought he'd be interested in, like, I know Zach Galifianakis and all these guys through Fitz, and, you know, they were around. Zach, I went on 2 bachelor parties with him before his Bachelor movie came out, the Hungover. Fitz's wedding, he and I were both, you know, at Fitz's bachelor party in Vegas. And then this guy, Mike Gibbons, who does the shows with Fitz, he was, I think, a year after Fitz. We went back again, and that year I was Zach's roommate. And I don't know if you know who Nick Schwartzen is.
Of course,
I was their roommate for 3. I mean, that
Big Mouth.
The stuff I did with those guys, and I was crazier than that Hangover movie, you know. I can't tell those stories.
I get it.
But I was hoping that, you know, Rogan would lighten it up since he knows all those guys. But he wanted to stay focused, which I guess was good in the end.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, I think it served a purpose for you. And it gave the light to your book and your heart and your soul of 20 years of your life, you know, because... just like look back, like if you wouldn't have done Rogan, how well would have all of this been?
Yeah, I don't think anything would have been remotely like this unless something important happened in the case, which was what I was hanging on to then.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Leslie Van Houten's attorney is going to court every month trying to get those audio tapes, the Watson tapes, because he thinks it, and he's right, he deserves to hear them since his client, you know, she's gotten paroled 3 or 4 times and the governor turns it over. So I keep thinking if something big in the case happens, and that will help. But then Rogan came in like an angel and got us a lot of the attention.
Yeah, bless it, man, because it's opened up my eyes and opened up so many other people's eyes around the world. So it's really cool. As we start to wrap this up, do you have anything else you wanted to ask him, good sir?
I do. I have 2 questions for you.
Dun, 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 dun.
Chaos has been.
I'm kind of fascinated by your graph there. Is that about this?
It is. So I actually take notes about the podcast for the clips that we use.
Okay.
But I did write down 2 questions that I just didn't want to forget. One was, chaos has been momentous, I'm sure, in your life. I mean, it's taken 20 years of your life of research.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was to ask you, what do you want to be remembered for? Is it chaos? Is it something about your research? What do you want to be remembered for in life?
I don't think anybody's ever asked me
That's
that.
a really good question.
But now I feel old because they don't ask young people that.
Oh no, we've had this conversation.
Yeah.
I'd be happy if I'm remembered for that book, but I do have another book that has nothing to do with any of this stuff that's been in my back pocket I actually wrote it in mornings for like when the lawsuit started and everything kind of froze. I kept reporting but we couldn't take the book out and sell it until the lawsuit was resolved, and that took like a year and a half. So every morning for like a couple hours, I wrote this separate book that had nothing to do with crime. It had to do with something that I went through when I was in my early 20s. It's all finished then. I did it in like a year, about 8 months. I've never read it. I kept it in the shelf. It's really personal and really
Vulnerable.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that if I ever go back and read it and share it with my agent or something, or now that I have a publisher, that would be as important as this was. But as for now, this is fine. This book. Yeah.
And then my second question is, I know we talked a little bit about there was a little bit of an obsession for you when you were digging deep in this, and you may not know where that comes from, but what were your parents like? What was that relationship that you had, and do you feel that they gave you this drive that really anybody who pushes towards something, especially for 20 years, knows that there's got to be at least one moment that your head told you, why are you doing this?
One moment every day.
Yeah, that's it.
Every single day. Well, no, that was the hardest part because I can't remember how much I put in the week. So Dan, when he came on as my collaborator, he said, we need more of you in there. And I'm like, I just want it to be about what I found out. And he goes, but we need the reader to root for you. And we have to show more of your personal life. So we did put in a little bit about my parents. I mean, I couldn't have done it without their support. And, my 2 older brothers, who were the good sons, are both attorneys and very accomplished. And thank God there's so many attorneys in the family, because I got sued by so many, or threatened to be sued. And I mean, I went through an eviction during this, and I had the Errol Morris thing where it became a legal battle at one point when I backed out of Errol's movie. And I needed, thank God I had attorneys in my family to help me with that. But financially, when the magazine stopped paying me, and it wasn't until I think 2005 that I got my first publishing advance from Penguin Press. So for 3 years, I was basically broke and borrowing money from family, my father. And I mean, if he hadn't done that, I couldn't have done it. And the best thing about him was, I mean, what I loved about him was the first time we talked about the possibility of Bugliosi being corrupt, he said, I'm an attorney. He said, number one, I didn't want to tell you this because I didn't want to bias you. I've never trusted him. He said, in his book, he talks about how he's never lost a murder case. He goes, attorneys are not supposed to win every time because people are innocent. You can't help if you get a case where the person's innocent, you have to prosecute it. But it's suspicious if somebody wins every time that they're cheating to do it. Yeah. And he goes, there's something about that man's ego and I didn't realize he was even that aware of him, but he did read books by Bugliosi. So, but the more important thing, I did touch upon this in the book a little, was he never really questioned. They were worried a little bit when it got like a year or two in, but about a year or two in, that's when I started having my first real serious FOIA battle with the Bureau of Prisons and the probation when I was trying to get Manson's federal parole file. And that's kind of when I seduced my dad really into it, because I asked his help on making my letters more legalistic. And he loved it. And he was still working,
Shit.
but he'd do it at night. So he would take my letters and then redraft them and use the kind of language that they had to respond to. And then he became a total believer. And there is a scene in the book where I was devastated after my Roger Smith interview, the very first one with him, when I thought I was going to break him like I wanted to break Bugliosi, and I didn't. And I really thought, I don't know how to continue, if I can't get that. And my dad gave me this wonderful little speech on the way to the train about how no matter what I chose, they were going to support me. They had faith in me, and he hoped I was going to. And that meant a lot. And unfortunately, he passed away like 5 years before the book came out. But luckily, my mom didn't, and she's sharp as a pistol. And when the book came out, it was the most important thing in the world. The day it came out, she went to Barnes and Noble, and so it was last year, 92, and she was waiting outside the store for them to open the door for her. Then she goes in, and then my book was at the new books table.
Yeah.
She said, no, you got to raise it. So she said, I'm his mother. So they put it up much higher.
No way.
Yeah, and then they took her picture with it, and all the employees came, So she loves this, She's like constantly asking about sales. And when they couldn't get the book at Amazon, she's like, you got to go to Little Brown and find out, I can rent a van, and I can go to the warehouse and take it to, where's Amazon? I go, on, you're 92. We're trying to get you to stop driving. 93, yeah. She was 93 then.
And have they always been that supportive?
Yeah, that's the thing. When I was,
Love that.
So I graduated from NYU with the BFA. It's a very expensive school, and
Yeah.
everybody in my family have got great career. Even my younger sister was doing really well, and I'm driving a horse and carriage in Central Park for 8 years. And I'm getting published about a year or two into that, but it wasn't a career until about 4 years into it. And I actually stayed doing it mostly part-time because I loved it, and also because it was giving me material for freelance writing stuff. And I never trusted the journalism career. I knew I would have that to fall back on. And, I often wondered, now she's tough, like on some of my nephews and nieces who are in their 20s and 30s. I'm like, Ma, you gave me a lot of space. Don't worry about them. They're finding themselves.
Yes.
And she goes, well, you can't now. Now that COVID's happening, it doesn't matter anymore. But I'm like, how did I get away? Why wasn't I ever really? They never, ever told me to stop doing what I was doing in any part of my life, I don't think. Except the bad behavior when I was living with them, in grade school and high school.
That's understandable. But it's allowed, when parents do that, it allows creativity. It fosters creativity.
Yeah.
And it allows you to be the person that you are today.
Yeah.
Big respect to your siblings.
Mm-hmm.
But 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they'll be talking about Tom O'Neill, and no, they will. I'm dead serious. Like your book is.
Oh wow!
I talk about it all the time. You had by far the biggest podcast individual in the world, Joe Rogan, bring you on, talk about it. So obviously there is validity to what I'm saying right now. And when I said at the very beginning of this podcast, you created a masterpiece, I truly believe that with my full heart. And it's been an honor and experience having you on the show. Like seriously, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I look forward to seeing what's next, the movie or part 2 or all of this. Seriously, I as I was telling you, I can just envision, a movie just based around the book and the struggle and the conversations and this, that, and the other. Definitely. I can't.
Well,
wait
I'm
till
a
it comes
little
out.
disappointed that it's. I talked about this on Rogan, I guess, but that it's a feature film and not a limited series because I don't know how they're going to get the whole book in 2 hours. But that's the other guy's problem, the screenwriter.
That is true.
I
Right?
would say the best is yet to come for you.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, I would say at least financially.
I hope so.
Yeah,
that'll
it will.
But I'd say on another level, as far as I think there are a lot of people that do what they have to do until they get to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I'm most excited for. I hope that we can have you back then.
Oh, yeah.
After you publish your passion project that's sitting in
Yeah.
your drawer that you haven't revisited.
It's not going to take 20 years, I promise.
All right. Thank you, Tom O'Neill.
Thanks,
we
brother.
appreciate you. And
Appreciate you for having me.
All right. Oh, hold on. Where can people find you? What's your Instagram, your website, all that good shit?
The website is tomoneal.org, I think. If you just Google my name and Manson or Chaos, you'll get the website. I'm so bad. This is the stuff I should know.
You should.
The Instagram which is where I'm putting the documents and videos, is I think called Chaos.
He's gonna find it right now.
Tom-O'Neill.org.
That's
your
right.
Website. Yep.
Yeah, that's got all the articles we're talking about. A lot of them are there if people want to see that crazy stuff.
We got it pulled up on the screen. We'll make
Boom.
sure to put it up there.
Look at that.
It looks like you have everything in the beginning based on chaos.
Yeah, that's just the first couple categories.
And then all actually excerpts of some of the articles.
Those are the full articles, yeah.
I'm gonna pull up your Instagram, man.
And then the Instagram, that's the one I really want people to see, because that's where they can see the documents that we couldn't fit in the book, see videos, audios. The one I'm going to put up probably tomorrow about the second part of Virginia Cardwell, I think it's the longest yet. It's like 17 or 18 minutes, and it's pretty intense. I show the documents that Bugliosi forged and stuff like that.
Now,
Holy shit.
I have to say this, that we are recording and posting.
Oh, so it'll be, it'll
already
be out.
But
yeah.
people should visit your Instagram. There's about a 17-minute video of something they have not seen or heard before, and they should check it out.
Yeah, definitely. And
And I also have it on a Facebook page for the book, but for whatever reason, the Instagram one seems more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Chaos Charles Manson. That is your Instagram.
Yeah.
So it's at Chaos Charles Manson.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say?
Not that I can think of, but thank you for this is fun. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you. We really appreciate that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Back to Your Story. Have a good night. Peace out. Motherfucker. Whoa! Wowzers. Thank you so much for watching the podcast. I had such an amazing time with Tom O'Neill. Seriously, when I read his book and saw him on Rogan, I never in a million years thought he would come on. But to really sit there and see and hear everything that he went through to put out this book, it is truly inspiring. Never give up. And if you really believe in something, keep on pushing. If you guys want to subscribe and watch more videos like this, hit that bad boy right there. You see my head? Hit that right there. And if you want to watch more amazing content like this podcast, hit that right there. Have a good night, people. Mazel tov.